Tonight, I want you to imagine a world without cemeteries. No gravestones standing beneath old trees. No funeral processions moving quietly through city streets. No flowers la beside monuments. No names carved into stone. No memories gathered around a grave. Imagine a world in which death simply happened. A world where there were no priests, no prayers, no rituals, and no belief that the dead deserved a special place among the living. For most of the history of life on Earth, that was exactly how things worked. When an animal died, its body remained where it fell. Wind, rain, insects, scavengers, and time slowly erased every trace of its existence. The living moved on. Nature continued. Millions of years passed this way. Entire species rose and vanished without leaving a single grave. And then something extraordinary happened. Somewhere in the distant past, long before cities, long before farming, long before written language, a small group of humans, or perhaps their close relatives, stopped beside a dead companion. Instead of walking away, they stayed. Instead of abandoning the body, they carried it. Instead of leaving it exposed to the elements, they dug into the earth. Then they placed the dead person inside. Carefully, deliberately, perhaps lovingly. Nobody knows what words were spoken. Nobody knows what emotions filled that ancient moment. But archaeologists believe that this simple act may represent one of the greatest turning points in human history. Because burying the dead is more than disposing of a body. It reveals something happening inside the mind. It suggests memory. It suggests grief. It suggests imagination. And perhaps most importantly, it suggests that humans had begun to think about things that could not be seen. Questions that still trouble us today. What happens after death? Does a person continue in some form? Can the dead somehow remain with the living? Those questions may have first emerged tens of thousands of years ago beside a shallow grave dug with primitive tools beneath an ice age sky. The evidence survives only in fragments. A few bones, a patch of colored earth, stone tools placed beside a skeleton, a child buried beneath a cave floor, tiny clues scattered across continents. Yet these fragments tell a remarkable story. The story of how humanity learned to remember its dead. To understand why this matters, we must travel back far beyond civilization, far beyond kingdoms and temples, far beyond history itself. We must return to a world that would be almost unrecognizable to us. A world of glaciers and mammoths. A world of predators that hunted humans. A world where every day was a struggle for survival. The Earth of 100,000 years ago was a harsher place than the one we know today. Much of the northern hemisphere was colder. Great ice sheets covered enormous regions. Sea levels were lower. Vast grasslands stretched across landscapes that are now submerged beneath oceans. Human populations were tiny. Instead of billions, there were perhaps only a few 100,000 humans scattered across enormous distances. Most people would never meet more than a few dozen individuals during their entire lives. Small bands wandered through forests, plains, mountains, and river valleys. They followed migrating animals, gathered edible plants, searched constantly for water and shelter. Their survival depended on cooperation. No individual could endure alone for long. Every member of the group mattered. A skilled hunter mattered. An experienced elder mattered. A mother mattered. A child mattered. And when one of those people died, the loss could be devastating. Not only emotionally. Practically, knowledge disappeared. Protection disappeared. Support disappeared. The entire group became weaker. Modern humans often think of ancient people as emotionally primitive. The stereotype imagines rough individuals concerned only with food and survival. But archaeological discoveries increasingly challenge that image. Again and again, researchers find evidence suggesting that ancient humans cared deeply for one another. Individuals with severe injuries survived for years because others helped them. People unable to hunt continued living because community supported them. The sick were cared for. The elderly were protected. And eventually, the dead were remembered. That last development may seem ordinary to us. After all, burial is nearly universal today. Yet from an evolutionary perspective, it is astonishing. A grave serves no obvious survival function. Digging takes effort. Transporting a body requires energy. Performing rituals consumes valuable time. In a dangerous environment, those resources were precious. So why do it? Why would a struggling Ice Age community devote energy to someone who could no longer contribute? The answer may reveal some of the deepest truths about human nature. Perhaps they buried the dead because they loved them. Perhaps they feared them. Perhaps they believed the spirit survived. Perhaps all three. The earliest graves do not provide clear answers. Instead, they present mysteries. Some skeletons were carefully positioned. Others were sprinkled with red ochre. Some were accompanied by tools. Others were buried with animal remains. A few graves seem almost ceremonial. Others appear surprisingly simple. Each discovery opens new questions. Every skeleton becomes a puzzle. And every puzzle leads us closer to understanding the moment when humanity crossed an invisible threshold. Because there is a profound difference between recognizing death and reflecting upon it. Many animals appear capable of sensing loss. Elephants linger near the bones of relatives. Chimpanzees sometimes remain beside deceased companions. Whales have been observed carrying dead calves for days. These behaviors suggest emotional responses to death. But burial is something different. Burial transforms death into meaning. It creates memory. It creates symbolism. It creates culture. When a body is intentionally placed within the earth, the act communicates an idea. The dead matter. Their existence continues to matter even after life has ended. That idea may have changed the course of human history. The first grave may have been the first monument, the first sacred space, the first attempt to connect the visible world with an invisible one. And if that is true, then the origins of burial are also the origins of religion, storytelling, ancestry, and perhaps even civilization itself. Tonight, we will follow that story. We will examine ancient caves hidden in remote mountains. We will meet archaeologists uncovering secrets buried for tens of thousands of years. We will explore the lives of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. And we will search for answers to one of the most fascinating questions in human history. When did humans first begin to bury their dead? More importantly, why? The answers lie beneath layers of soil and stone. They wait inside forgotten graves dug by hands that vanished long ago. Hands remarkably similar to our own. Hands that, in a moment of grief, compassion, fear, hope, or love, performed an act that would echo through all of human history. An act that transformed death from an ending into a memory, and perhaps transformed humans into something entirely new. Chapter 2. Before Burial. Life among early humans. Before we can understand why humans began burying their dead, we must first understand how they lived. The grave itself is only part of the story. To understand the first burial, we must step into a world where burial did not yet exist. A world where every sunrise brought uncertainty. A world where survival demanded constant attention. A world where death was not a rare visitor, but a familiar companion. Imagine waking before dawn nearly 100,000 years ago. There is no house around you, no village, no roads, no woods, no cities glowing on the horizon. Instead, there is only wilderness. Perhaps you sleep beneath a rocky overhang overlooking a valley. Perhaps inside a cave that shelters your small group from wind and rain. Perhaps beneath a temporary shelter built from branches, hides, and bones. The air is cold, far colder than many places today. The world is still deep within the grip of the Ice Age. Great glaciers dominate parts of the northern hemisphere. Massive sheets of ice stretch across regions that would one day become modern nations. The climate shifts constantly. Temperatures rise and fall over centuries. Forests advance and retreat. Grasslands expand. Rivers change course. Animals migrate across immense distances. Humans must adapt or disappear. Your group is small, perhaps 20 people. perhaps 30, rarely much larger. Everyone knows everyone else. There are no strangers within your community. Each face is familiar, each voice recognizable. Each individual plays a role in helping the group survive. The old woman who remembers where water can be found during drought. The skilled hunter who understands animal behavior. The young mother carrying an infant. The adolescent learning to shape stone tools. The child gathering berries near the camp. Together, they form a living network of knowledge and support. No one survives alone. This reality shaped early human life more than anything else. Modern people often imagine ancient humans as rugged individuals battling nature through strength and courage. The truth appears different. Evidence suggests that cooperation was humanity's greatest survival tool. Long before agriculture, long before metal, long before writing, humans survived because they worked together. A lone human in the Ice Age landscape faced overwhelming odds. Compared with many predators, humans were not especially fast, not especially strong, not equipped with claws or powerful teeth. A lion possessed greater strength. A wolf possessed greater speed. A bear possessed greater power. Yet humans possessed something unique. They could cooperate on an extraordinary scale. They could communicate, plan, teach, learn, share knowledge across generations. Those abilities transformed weakness into strength. When dawn arrives, your group begins moving. Food is never guaranteed. Every day requires effort. Every day requires decisions. Which direction should the hunters travel? Where can edible plants be found? Is the nearby river still safe? Have dangerous predators entered the area? A mistake can be costly. A poor decision can lead to hunger. In extreme cases, death. Life unfolds according to rhythms established over countless generations. The hunters follow tracks through damp earth. The gatherers search for roots, nuts, fruits, and edible plants. Children learn by watching adults. Knowledge passes from one generation to the next through observation and experience. There are no books, no schools, no written instructions. Everything depends upon memory. Everything depends upon teaching. The death of a knowledgeable individual can therefore be catastrophic. When an elder dies, information dies with them. Locations of seasonal resources, knowledge of medicinal plants, memories of dangerous territories, stories explaining migration routes, skills refined over decades, all risk disappearing. This may be one reason early humans cared deeply about one another. Every individual represented far more than a single life. Each person carried valuable knowledge essential for group survival. Archaeological discoveries reveal remarkable examples of this social support. One of the most fascinating comes from ancient human relatives who lived tens of thousands of years ago. Researchers have discovered skeletons showing evidence of severe injuries and disabilities. Individuals who lost limbs. Individuals suffering from crippling conditions. Individuals who could not have survived independently. Yet they lived for years after their injuries. How? Someone helped them. Someone shared food. Someone provided protection. Someone cared for them. These discoveries challenge older assumptions that prehistoric life was brutally indifferent. Instead, they suggest compassion, community, mutual support. The roots of empathy may run far deeper into human history than once believed. As days pass, dangers remain constant. Predators roam the landscape. Huge cats stalk prey through tall grass. Hyenas patrol the darkness. Wolves travel in packs. Massive bears dominate certain territories. Even successful hunters can become prey. The boundary between hunter and hunted remains fragile. Night brings additional risks. Darkness transforms familiar landscapes into uncertain territory. Sounds echo differently. Movement becomes difficult to interpret. A distant growl may signal danger. The crack of a branch may trigger alarm. Fire becomes precious, a source of warmth, a source of protection, a gathering place around which social life unfolds. Many evenings are likely spent around flickering flames. Faces illuminated by orange light. Voices sharing experiences from the day's journey. Lessons passed from elders to younger members. Stories told and retold. Perhaps laughter. Perhaps warnings. Perhaps memories. We cannot know exactly what was said around those ancient fires. Yet language almost certainly played a central role in human success. Through language, humans could discuss events not immediately present. They could talk about yesterday, plan for tomorrow, imagine posibilidades, share emotions. Language expanded the human mind beyond the immediate moment. And perhaps it also transformed humanity's relationship with death. Because once people can tell stories, they can remember the absent. They can speak about individuals who are no longer there. They can preserve identities after physical presence disappears. This ability may have laid the foundation for burial practices, but that development still lies in the future. For now, death remains a common reality. Infant mortality is high. Injuries are frequent. Disease exists, even if poorly understood. Accidents happen. Starvation sometimes threatens communities. Few people reach old age by modern standards. Every group experiences loss. Every group witnesses death. Imagine a child growing up in such an environment. By adolescence, they may already have seen multiple deaths. A grandparent, a sibling, a hunting companion, perhaps even a parent. Death is familiar. Yet familiarity does not eliminate grief. The archaeological record cannot directly reveal emotions. Bones do not preserve feelings. Skeletons do not record tears. But human emotional capacities likely evolved long before recorded history. Love, attachment, fear, loss. These experiences are deeply rooted in human biology. The death of a loved one would still hurt, even in a world where death was expected. In fact, close-knit communities may have intensified emotional bonds. When your entire social world consists of 20 or 30 individuals, every loss becomes significant. Every absence becomes noticeable. The empty place near the fire. The missing voice during conversation. The hunter who no longer returns from expeditions. The elder whose stories are no longer heard. Loss changes the group itself. Perhaps this is where the origins of burial begin. Not in religion, not in philosophy, but in relationships. In the simple fact that humans form powerful emotional connections. Connections strong enough to persist after death. Scientists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies often observe the importance of social bonds. Cooperation is not optional. It is essential. Food sharing increases survival. Collective childcare benefits communities. Mutual defense provides security. Over thousands of generations, natural selection may have favored individuals capable of forming strong social attachments. Empathy became advantageous. Compassion became useful. Caring for others increased group resilience. The result was a species uniquely adapted for social life. A species capable of profound emotional investment in others. Such emotional investment inevitably creates grief. And grief creates questions. What should be done with the body? How should the group respond? How should memories be preserved? Initially, practical considerations may have dominated. Bodies attract scavengers. Bodies can spread disease. Bodies alter the environment around campsites. Removing them may have been necessary. Yet practical explanations alone do not account for what archaeologists eventually discover. Because some ancient burials display signs of deliberate care. Bodies positioned carefully. Objects placed beside the deceased. Graves prepared with surprising attention. These actions suggest motives extending beyond simple disposal. To understand why, we must consider another extraordinary feature of a human mind. Imagination. Humans possess a remarkable ability to think about things that do not physically exist. Future events, past experiences, invisible forces, hypothetical situations. This cognitive ability transformed human evolution. It enabled planning, innovation, art, religion, and perhaps concepts of an afterlife. Imagine standing beside the body of a recently deceased companion. Yesterday they spoke. Yesterday they moved. Yesterday they laughed. Today they're motionless. The body remains. Yet something appears absent. Something essential seems missing. Modern people often describe this sensation instinctively. The person is gone. The body remains, but the person is gone. Such perceptions may arise naturally from human cognition. They may encourage beliefs that some aspect of identity survives physical death. We cannot know precisely when these ideas emerged, yet they may have ancient origins, far older than written religion, far older than civilization, perhaps even older than our own species. Evidence increasingly suggests that symbolic thought developed gradually over immense spans of time. It did not appear suddenly. Instead, cognitive abilities accumulated across generations. Simple symbolism evolved into more complex symbolism. Memory evolved into tradition. Tradition evolved into ritual. Eventually, burial became one expression of these developments. But before graves could exist, another transformation had to occur. Humans needed to perceive the dead as individuals who continued to matter, not simply biological remains, not merely abandoned bodies. Individuals, people whose existence deserved recognition, people whose memory deserved preservation. This idea may seem obvious today, yet it represents a profound shift. Many animals respond to death. Humans appear unique in transforming those responses into culture. The first burial may have emerged from that transformation. A bridge between emotion and ritual. A bridge between grief and meaning. A bridge between biological existence and symbolic thought. As the centuries pass, human minds continue changing. Communities accumulate knowledge. Traditions become established. Social bonds deepen. Symbolic behavior becomes increasingly visible. And somewhere within this vast timeline, an extraordinary event occurs. For the first time we can presently detect in the archaeological record, humans begin treating their dead differently. Not abandoning them, not ignoring them, not leaving them exposed. Instead, they place them into the earth. Carefully, deliberately, purposefully. A new chapter in human history begins. And in the next chapter, we will explore that turning point. We will examine what death meant before burial existed. We will investigate how ancient humans may have responded to loss. And we will follow the clues leading toward one of humanity's most important inventions, the grave. Chapter 3. Death in a World Without Ritual. Before the first grave was dug, before red ochre stained ancient bones, before flowers, prayers, and funerals became part of human experience, there was a time when death existed without ritual. It is difficult for us to imagine such a world. Today, nearly every culture possesses traditions surrounding death. Some bury their dead. Some cremate them. Some build tombs. Some construct monuments. Some gather for ceremonies lasting days or weeks. Others observe quiet moments of remembrance. The details vary, but the underlying idea remains remarkably consistent. Death matters. The dead deserve attention. The dead deserve recognition. Yet this belief had to begin somewhere. There was a time when no tradition existed. A time before graves. A time before funeral rites. A time before anyone knew what should happen when a member of the group died. That forgotten era stretches deep into prehistory, far beyond written records, far beyond memory, into a world where humanity was still discovering what it meant to be human. Imagine a small band of hunter-gatherers moving across an ice age landscape. The day has been difficult. Food is scarce. The weather is turning colder. The group must reach shelter before darkness arrives. Then tragedy strikes. One of their members collapses. Perhaps illness has weakened them. Perhaps injury has taken its toll. Perhaps age has finally overcome strength. Whatever the cause, life slips away. For a moment, everything changes. The group stops. Silence falls. The familiar voice is gone. The breathing has ceased. The eyes no longer focus. A person who moments ago was part of the community has become something else. A body. The living are left with questions. Questions that have no obvious answers. What should they do now? Should they remain? Should they leave? Should they carry the body? Should they abandon it? Nobody has written instructions. No ancestor has established a ritual. No tradition guides their actions. Every decision must be discovered. Perhaps the earliest responses to death were practical rather than symbolic. The living had to survive. That reality shaped every aspect of existence. Carrying a body across long distances required energy. Digging into frozen ground demanded effort. Remaining in one location too long increased risk. Predators might arrive. Resources might become scarce. The group might need to continue moving. Under such conditions, practical concerns often dominate. Many scientists believe that for much of prehistory, bodies may simply have been left where death occurred. This practice, known as exposure, remains part of some cultures even today. Nature takes over. Scavenger arrive. Weather and time erase the remains. Nothing more is required. From a purely practical perspective, exposure makes sense. It demands little effort. It allows the living to focus on survival. It avoids the challenges associated with transporting or burying a body. Yet humans are not creatures guided solely by practicality. Even in the harshest conditions, emotions matter. And emotions complicate simple decisions. Imagine being asked to leave behind someone you loved. A parent, a sibling, a child, a lifelong companion. The practical choice might be obvious. The emotional choice might not. This tension between practicality and attachment may have shaped humanity's earliest encounters with death. Because death creates a strange contradiction. The body remains present. The person does not. Every human society has wrestled with this contradiction. You can touch the body. You can see it. Yet something feels missing. Something essential seems absent. Modern neuroscience offers various explanations for this sensation. Our brains are designed to recognize people as active social beings. When a familiar individual suddenly becomes motionless, the mind struggles to reconcile expectation with reality. Part of us continues expecting movement, speech, response, interaction. When those expectations are not fulfilled, the experience feels profoundly unsettling. Ancient humans likely experienced similar reactions. Their minds were fundamentally human. Their emotions were fundamentally human. The death of a companion would have triggered confusion, sadness, and uncertainty. Perhaps even fear. Fear may have played a larger role than we often realize. Throughout history, many cultures have viewed the dead with a mixture of affection and anxiety. The deceased are loved, but they are also different. Something mysterious has occurred, something not fully understood. In a world without scientific explanations, death would have appeared deeply enigmatic. A healthy hunter could become a lifeless body. A child full of energy could suddenly stop breathing. An elder who spoke yesterday could remain silent forever. Why? What caused it? Could it happen again? Could it spread? Ancient humans possessed no knowledge of viruses, bacteria, genetics, or internal organ failure. They observed effects without understanding underlying causes. As a result, death may have seemed unpredictable and frightening. Fear of the dead appears in many later societies. Ghost stories, spirits, restless ancestors, protective rituals. These traditions may reflect ancient psychological responses to mortality. Even if early humans lacked formal spiritual beliefs, they may still have felt unease around the dead. The body changed quickly. Within hours, signs of decay appeared. Within days, transformation became impossible to ignore. The familiar face altered. The familiar form became unfamiliar. The living were confronted with physical evidence that life had departed. Such experiences likely influence behavior. Bodies may have been moved away from living areas, not only for hygiene, not only for safety, but because death itself felt different, mysterious, uncomfortable, difficult to understand. Yet fear alone cannot explain everything archaeologists discover, because alongside fear, there is evidence of care. Again and again, Researchers encounter signs suggesting that prehistoric humans remained connected to the dead in meaningful ways. One clue comes from the treatment of bodies themselves. A body discarded carelessly leaves one kind of archaeological signature. A body positioned deliberately leaves another. The distinction matters. When archaeologists excavate ancient sites, they study not only bones but context. How was the skeleton arranged? Were the limbs positioned naturally? Was the body protected? Were objects placed nearby? These details help reconstruct behavior, and sometimes they reveal remarkable patterns. Certain ancient remains appear intentionally arranged. Arms folded, legs positioned, bodies placed in specific locations. Such patterns suggest deliberate action. Someone cared enough to intervene. Someone invested time and effort. Someone chose not to abandon the dead. This development marks an important step, because before burial emerges fully, there may have been intermediate stages. Humans rarely invent complex behaviors instantly. Most cultural practices evolve gradually. The first burial was probably not a sudden invention. More likely, it emerged from earlier behaviors. Perhaps bodies were initially moved to special places. Perhaps they were protected from scavengers. Perhaps families returned to sites where loved ones had died. Perhaps memories accumulated around certain locations. Over generations, simple actions may have become traditions. Traditions may have become rituals. Rituals may have become burial. This gradual process is difficult to trace. The archaeological record is incomplete. Most ancient deaths left no evidence. Most bodies vanished long ago. What survives represents only a tiny fraction of the past. Yet even these fragments reveal important clues. One particularly fascinating clue involves children. Throughout human history, the death of children has often inspired intense emotional responses. Parents invest enormous energy into raising offspring. The loss of a child can be devastating. This pattern likely extends deep into prehistory. Some of the earliest possible burials involve infants and young children. Researchers debate the meaning of these discoveries, but one possibility stands out. The treatment of children may reveal emotional attachments strong enough to overcome practical considerations. A tiny body requires little effort to carry. A small grave requires little effort to dig. Perhaps children were among the first individuals intentionally buried. Not because they held special social status, but because grief demanded action, because parents could not simply walk away, because emotional bonds created new behaviors. This possibility remains speculative, yet highlights an important theme. The origins of burial may be rooted in ordinary human relationships. Not kings, not priests, not powerful leaders. Parents, children, friends, companions. People who cared about one another. As human societies developed increasingly sophisticated social lives, another factor emerged: memory. Humans possess extraordinary abilities to remember individuals long after death. We replay conversations, recall faces, revisit shared experiences. Ancient humans likely did the same. A deceased companion might remain present in stories, present in recollections, present in daily thoughts. The physical absence of the individual contrasted with their continued psychological presence. This tension may have encouraged symbolic behavior. The dead were gone, yet they were not entirely gone. They continued existing within memory, and memory itself can become powerful. A remembered person continues influencing the living. Lessons survive. Stories survive. Emotional connections survive. Eventually, humans may have sought physical ways to preserve these connections. A grave accomplishes exactly that. It creates a place where memory can reside, a location connecting past and present. But before graves existed, memory had nowhere to anchor itself. The dead disappeared into landscapes, into forests, into caves, into rivers, into the vastness of the natural world. Their identities survived only within the minds of the living. Perhaps this felt insufficient. Perhaps humans desired something more. A visible reminder, a designated place, a way to acknowledge loss. The earliest steps toward burial may have emerged from that desire. Not yet religion, not yet ceremony, simply recognition. Recognition that the dead still mattered. Recognition that relationships did not end instantly. Recognition that memory deserved expression. Over thousands of years, these impulses grew stronger. Human cognition continued evolving. Symbolic thinking expanded. Social bonds deepened. Cultural traditions became increasingly complex. And somewhere during this long journey, a revolutionary idea appeared. Instead of leaving the dead behind, humans could place them within the earth. Not hidden accidentally, not abandoned, placed intentionally, meaningfully. The ground itself became part of the process. The earth became a resting place, a boundary between life and death, a location where memory could endure. Archaeologists searching for the origins of burial often describe this transition as one of the most significant developments in human history. Not because graves are technologically impressive. A grave is, after all, only a hole in the ground. But because of what it represents. A grave reflects thought, emotion, symbolism, community. It reveals minds capable of imagining meaning beyond immediate survival. And that may be one of the defining characteristics of humanity. The first burial was not merely a new way of handling a body. It was a new way of understanding existence itself. Yet before burial became established, another important transformation occurred. Humans began caring for one another in ways that left lasting evidence. Evidence preserved not in graves, but in bones. Evidence suggesting compassion existed long before formal funeral rituals. In the next chapter, we will explore those remarkable discoveries. We will meet ancient individuals who survived devastating injuries because others refused to abandon them. We will examine some of the oldest evidence for human empathy, and we will discover why compassion may have paved the way for the first grave ever dug. Chapter 4. The First Signs of Compassion. Long before humans buried their dead, they may have learned something even more important. They learned how to care for the living. This chapter is not about graves. Not yet. It is about kindness, about survival, about the quiet acts of support that rarely leave traces in history. And yet, against all odds, some of those acts did leave traces. Not in stories, not in writing, but in bone. Thousands of years before the first cities appeared, before kings ruled kingdoms, before temples rose from the earth, ancient humans were already facing a challenge that every society eventually encounters. What should be done when someone becomes weak? What should be done when someone can no longer contribute? What should be done when survival demands difficult choices? For much of the 20th century, many researchers imagined prehistoric life as relentlessly harsh. The popular image showed brutal conditions where only the strongest survived. In this vision, injured individuals were abandoned. The weak were left behind. Every person had to fend for themselves. At first glance, this assumption seemed reasonable. Life in the Ice Age was undeniably difficult. Food shortages occurred. Predators posed constant threats. Injuries could be fatal. A small group struggling to survive might not seem capable of supporting members who could no longer hunt, gather, or travel effectively. Yet archaeology has revealed a very different picture. Again and again, scientists have discovered evidence suggesting that ancient humans cared for one another in surprisingly sophisticated ways. These discoveries begin with skeletons. Not ordinary skeletons, extraordinary ones. Individuals whose very existence challenges assumptions about prehistoric life. Imagine a hunter suffering a devastating injury. Perhaps a broken leg. Perhaps a crushed arm. Perhaps blindness in one eye. In a modern world, medical care can help such individuals recover. But in prehistory, there were no hospitals, no surgery, no antibiotics, no painkillers beyond whatever remedies nature provided. A severe injury could easily become a death sentence. Yet some injured individuals survived. Not for days, not for weeks, for years, sometimes decades. Their bones tell the story. A broken bone heals in recognizable ways. An infection leaves characteristic marks. A disability reshapes the skeleton over time. When archaeologists examine ancient remains, they can often determine whether a person lived long after suffering an injury. And in many cases, the answer is yes. One remarkable example comes from an ancient human relative who lived tens of thousands of years ago. The individual had severe physical impairments. The injuries would have made independent survival extraordinarily difficult. Yet the person continued living for years. How? The answer seems unavoidable. Other people helped. Other people shared food. Other people offered protection. Other people cared. This conclusion carries enormous implications, because caring for someone who cannot fully contribute requires sacrifice. Food shared with an injured companion is food not available elsewhere. Time spent assisting a disabled individual is time that could be used for other tasks. Resources devoted to care represent an investment. A community making such investments demonstrates something profound. It values individuals beyond their immediate usefulness. That idea may sound familiar to us. It forms the basis of many modern ethical systems. Yet seeing evidence of it tens of thousands of years ago remains astonishing. The roots of compassion appear far older than civilization, far older than agriculture, possibly older than our own species. Consider what daily life might have looked like for an injured individual in prehistoric times. Perhaps they could no longer hunt. Perhaps they struggled to walk. Perhaps they needed assistance moving from place to place. Someone would need to help. Someone would need to gather additional food. Someone would need to ensure their safety. These actions are not automatic. They require intention, empathy, patience, commitment, and perhaps affection, because compassion is rarely a single act. It is a series of acts repeated over time. A meal shared today, a burden carried tomorrow, support offered again and again. The archaeological evidence suggests that ancient humans were capable of exactly this kind of sustained care, which raises an intriguing question. If they cared so deeply for the living, what happened when those individuals eventually died? The answer may help explain the origins of burial. But before we reach that point, we must spend more time examining the social world of early humans. Because compassion does not emerge in isolation. It grows from relationships, and relationships were central to survival. Imagine a small group gathered around a fire after sunset. The day's work is finished. Children sit near parents. Hunters return from the landscape. Elders share knowledge accumulated across decades. Stories are told. Experiences are exchanged. Lessons are remembered. Within such groups, individuals develop powerful emotional bonds. Modern neuroscience suggests that humans are biologically adapted for social connection. Our brains respond strongly to relationships. We experience attachment, trust, belonging, love, loss. These capacities are not cultural inventions. They are deeply rooted aspects of human nature. Ancient humans likely experienced them as vividly as we do today. A parent worried about a child. A child admired an elder. Friends relied upon one another. Partners formed lasting bonds. These relationships shaped everyday life. And when death occurred, those relationships did not simply vanish. The emotional consequences remained. This is where compassion and burial begin to intersect, because the treatment of the dead often reflects the strength of bonds formed during life. A stranger's death affects us differently than the death of someone we love. The closer the relationship, the deeper the impact. For early humans living in small communities, relationships were especially intense. Their social world was limited. Their dependence upon one another was enormous. Every individual mattered. Every loss mattered. The death of a community member, therefore, represented more than biological change. It altered the entire social structure. A voice disappeared. A role vanished. A relationship ended. The group itself became different. Archaeologists sometimes refer to humans as a species uniquely capable of maintaining social connections across time. We remember absent individuals. We imagine future descendants. We preserve relationships through memory. This ability may seem ordinary because we practice it constantly. Yet from an evolutionary perspective, it is remarkable. Most animals respond to immediate circumstances. Humans routinely think about individuals who are not physically present. We recall ancestors. We honor the deceased. We tell stories about people long gone. Such behavior depends upon imagination and memory working together. And once those capacities exist, death becomes more complicated. The dead remain psychologically present even after physical absence. A loved one may continue influencing thoughts, emotions, and decisions. Their memory persists. Their importance persists. Perhaps early humans experienced this persistence intensely. Perhaps they struggled to reconcile physical loss with emotional continuity. If so, burial may eventually have emerged as one solution. A way to acknowledge both realities simultaneously. The body is gone from daily life. The person remains within memory. The grave becomes a bridge between absence and remembrance. Yet we are still moving ahead too quickly. Before graves become common, there is another fascinating development to consider: the emergence of symbolic thinking. Compassion alone does not produce burial. Many social animals care for one another. What distinguishes humans is their tendency to attach meaning to actions. Humans create symbols. Objects come to represent ideas. Places acquire significance. Behaviors become rituals. The archaeological record suggests that symbolic thinking gradually expanded over hundreds of thousands of years. Pigments were collected. Patterns were carved. Objects were preserved. Certain locations appear to have held special importance. These developments indicate minds increasingly concerned with meanings beyond immediate survival. And once symbolic thinking enters the picture, death acquires new dimensions. A body is no longer simply a body. It can represent a person, a memory, a relationship, a story, an identity. The treatment of the dead becomes meaningful. Every action communicates something: respect, affection, fear, belief, recognition. This transformation may have occurred gradually. Perhaps an injured elder dies after years of receiving care. The community feels the loss deeply. Instead of abandoning the body immediately, they remain nearby. Perhaps they sit in silence. Perhaps they touch the deceased one final time. Perhaps they move the body to a safer location. Perhaps they arrange it carefully. Each small action reflects an emotional response. Each action creates precedent. Future generations observe. Future generations imitate. Over time, habits become traditions. Traditions become rituals. Rituals become culture. Many of humanity's most important practices likely emerged this way. Not through sudden invention, through accumulation. One generation adds a small detail. Another generation preserves it. A third generation expands it. Eventually, the practice becomes established. Burial may have followed exactly this path. What begins as compassion evolves into ceremony. What begins as grief evolves into ritual. What begins as practical care evolves into symbolic behavior. The process unfolds across immense stretches of time, thousands upon thousands of years, countless generations, countless acts of kindness. The archaeological evidence cannot capture every step. Most of those moments vanished forever. No record survives of the parent comforting a grieving child. No record survives of friends mourning a companion. No record survives of silent gatherings around ancient fires. Yet the bones reveal enough. Enough to show that compassion existed. Enough to show that care existed. Enough to demonstrate that early humans valued one another in profound ways. And that realization changes how we understand the first grave. Because burial was not merely about death. It was the final expression of a relationship that began during life, a relationship sustained through care, a relationship strong enough to inspire action even after life ended. The first grave was probably not dug by strangers. It was likely dug by people who cared, people who remembered, people who felt loss, people who could not simply walk away. Somewhere in prehistory, a community faced death and chose a different response. Not abandonment, not indifference, but deliberate care. Care extended beyond life itself. And when that happened, something extraordinary entered human history. The dead began receiving treatment unlike anything seen before. The earth opened, a body was placed inside, and a new chapter in the human story began. In the next chapter, we will travel to some of the earliest archaeological sites associated with intentional burial. We will enter ancient caves where astonishing discoveries waited for tens of thousands of years. And we will examine the evidence for what may be among the first graves ever created by human hands. Chapter 5. The Cave of the Ancestors. If we want to find the origins of burial, there's one place we must visit before all others. Not a city, not a temple, not a kingdom. Those things would not exist for tens of thousands of years. Instead, our search leads us into darkness, into caves. Throughout human history, caves have occupied a special place in the imagination. They shelter, they protect, they conceal, they separate the outside world from something deeper and quieter. Even today, stepping into a cave feels different from stepping into any other environment. The temperature changes, sounds become muted, light fades. The ordinary world seems to remain behind. For prehistoric humans, caves were often more than simple shelters. They became places of memory, places of art, places of ritual, and perhaps, long before written religion existed, places of the dead. Imagine approaching a cave entrance 50,000 years ago. The landscape around you is wild and untamed. Wind sweeps across open plains. Distant herds move through the grasslands. Predators roam unseen beyond ridges and valleys. Yet the cave remains still, solid, permanent. Generations may come and go, but the stone endures. A child born beside this cave might one day grow old and die beside the same entrance. The cave becomes a constant presence in a changing world. This permanence may help explain why some of the earliest evidence of burial appears within caves. Unlike open-air campsites, caves preserve remains. They protect bones from weather. They shield evidence from erosion. As a result, they serve as remarkable archaeological time capsules. Many of humanity's earliest clues about death come from these underground archives. When archaeologists excavate caves, they are often uncovering thousands of years of history layered atop one another. Each layer represents a different moment in time, a different generation, a different story. Sometimes these layers contain extraordinary surprises. A stone tool, a hearth, an animal bone, a fragment of pigment, and occasionally a skeleton. A skeleton positioned in a way that suggests intention. A skeleton that forces us to ask difficult questions. Was this person buried? Or did natural processes simply place them here? This distinction is far more important than it might seem. To modernize, a skeleton in the ground automatically suggests burial. But archaeologists must be careful. Nature can create misleading appearances. A body may fall into a pit. Sediment may gradually cover remains. Floods can move bones. Rock collapses can alter positions. What appears intentional may sometimes be accidental. Therefore, identifying the earliest burials requires extraordinary caution. Researchers examine every detail: body position, surrounding soil, associated artifacts, patterns of preservation. The goal is to determine whether human hands deliberately placed the deceased into the ground. When enough evidence points toward intentional action, a burial begins to emerge. And some of the oldest potential burials in human history come from caves that remained hidden for tens of thousands of years. Imagine the moment of discovery. An archaeologist carefully brushes away soil. A fragment of bone appears. Then another. Gradually, the outline of a skeleton emerges. The body is not scattered randomly. It lies in a specific position. The bones remain connected. The individual appears to have been placed there carefully. Excitement grows. Questions multiply. Who is this person? Who buried them? Why? How long ago? Each ancient burial represents a message from a vanished world, a silent communication sent across immense stretches of time. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about these messages is their emotional familiarity. Although separated from us by tens of thousands of years, the people responsible for these burials may have experienced feelings we instantly recognize. Grief, love, respect, loss. These emotions connect us to them across unimaginable distances in time. One reason caves became important burial locations may involve memory. Unlike temporary campsites, caves endure. A community could return repeatedly to the same place. Children could grow up hearing stories associated with specific chambers. Certain areas might acquire special significance. The cave becomes more than shelter. It becomes part of the group's identity. Imagine a small community living near a familiar cave for generations. When someone dies, placing them within that cave keeps them close. Close to family, close to memory, close to the places where life unfolded. The deceased remains part of the landscape of the living. This possibility remains speculative, but it reflects patterns observed throughout human history. People often choose burial places connected to community and identity. Ancient humans may have done the same. Yet caves offered practical advantages as well. They provided protection from scavengers. A body placed within a cave was less vulnerable to immediate disturbance. The location could be revisited, remembered, maintained. Practical concerns and emotional concerns may have worked together. The earliest burials likely did not arise from a single motivation. Human behavior is rarely that simple. Love and practicality can coexist. Respect and caution can coexist. Memory and necessity can coexist. The first graves may have emerged from this complex mixture. As archaeologists continued exploring ancient caves during the 20th century, an intriguing pattern became visible. Many early human remains showed signs of deliberate placement. Bodies appeared arranged, protected, positioned. Some were curled into fetal-like postures. Others rested in shallow depressions. A few seemed accompanied by objects, not random objects, objects apparently placed with the deceased. This detail is especially significant because once objects accompany the dead, new possibilities emerge. Was the object meaningful? Was it symbolic? Was it intended for use after death? Or was it simply part of the burial process? Each possibility carries profound implications. If objects were intentionally included because they mattered to the deceased, then burial already involved memory and identity. If objects were intended to accompany the dead into another existence, then spiritual beliefs may already have been developing. The evidence rarely provides certainty, but it reveals complexity. The treatment of the dead was becoming more sophisticated, more deliberate, more meaningful. And yet, among all these discoveries, one category of burial often captures particular attention: the burial of children. Children appear again and again in discussions about humanity's earliest graves. There is something especially moving about these discoveries, perhaps because they remind us that parental love is ancient, far older than civilization, far older than recorded history. Imagine a mother or father losing a child in prehistory. The pain would have been no less real than it is today. The language may have differed. The culture may have differed. The world itself may have differed. But grief remains grief. Love remains love. When archaeologists uncover ancient child burials, they sometimes find evidence of remarkable care. Bodies positioned gently, protected by surrounding materials, occasionally accompanied by meaningful items. Such discoveries suggest emotional investment extending beyond death. The child mattered. The memory mattered. The burial itself mattered. These burials challenge simplistic views of prehistoric life. They reveal emotional depth. They reveal attachment. They reveal humanity. Perhaps this is one reason the study of ancient burial is so compelling. It transforms distant ancestors from abstract figures into recognizable people. Not names, not dates, people. Individuals who worried about their families. Individuals who formed friendships. Individuals who mourned losses. Individuals whose emotional lives may have resembled our own far more than we often imagine. Standing inside an archaeological excavation, surrounded by ancient remains, researchers sometimes describe a strange sensation. The feeling that time collapses. The realization that the individual before them once lived a full life. A life filled with experiences now almost entirely forgotten. They laughed. They feared. They hoped. They suffered. They loved. And when they died, someone cared enough to remember. Someone cared enough to act. Someone cared enough to leave evidence that survived tens of thousands of years. The first graves are not grand monuments. They're not impressive architecture. They are humble, simple, sometimes barely visible. Yet their significance is enormous, because every intentional burial reflects a decision, a conscious choice, a refusal to treat death as mere biological disposal, a recognition that the deceased remained important. This recognition may represent one of the defining moments in human history, a moment when survival alone was no longer enough, a moment when memory became action, a moment when compassion became ritual. The caves preserve traces of that transformation, layer by layer, bone by bone, grave by grave. And among all the discoveries hidden within these ancient chambers, one type of burial stands out as especially important. A burial so ancient that it continues to inspire debate among scientists today. The burial of a child, a small body placed carefully into the earth long ago. A discovery that may offer one of the earliest glimpses into humanity's changing relationship with death. In the next chapter, we will examine that extraordinary evidence. We will follow archaeologists as they uncover one of prehistory's most haunting graves. And we will explore why a child's burial may hold the key to understanding how humanity first learned to honor its dead. Chapter 6: The Child in the Pit. Among all the ancient graves discovered by archaeologists, few evoke as much emotion as the graves of children. The burial of an adult can tell us many things. It can reveal social status. It can reveal cultural practices. It can reveal beliefs and traditions. But the burial of a child often reveals something more intimate, something deeply personal. A child has little status. A child possesses few achievements. A child has not yet become a great hunter, a respected elder, or a leader within the community. When a child receives special treatment after death, it often suggests something fundamental: love, care, attachment. The kind of attachment that exists not because of what someone contributes, but simply because of who they are. That is why some of the earliest child burials hold such importance. They may provide a glimpse into the emotional world of our distant ancestors, a glimpse into grief itself. Imagine a small group living near the edge of a river valley tens of thousands of years ago. The seasons have changed many times. Children have been born. Elders have passed away. Life continues according to rhythms older than memory. Then tragedy arrives. A child dies. Perhaps illness is responsible. Perhaps an accident. Perhaps a harsh winter. We will never know. The details disappeared long ago. What remains is the aftermath, the response of the living. In many animal species, the death of offspring triggers visible reactions. Modern researchers have documented heartbreaking examples. Elephant mothers lingering beside dead calves. Chimpanzees carrying deceased infants for days. Whales refusing to abandon lost young. These behaviors suggest that parental attachment is not uniquely human. The roots of caregiving run deep within the animal kingdom. Yet humans eventually carried these emotions in a new direction. Instead of merely responding to loss, they began creating lasting expressions of loss. Burial may represent one of the earliest examples. Somewhere in prehistory, A grieving community faced a decision. What should happen to the child? The practical answer may have been simple. Leave the body. Move on. Continue the struggle for survival. But that is not what happened. Instead, the body was placed into the earth. Carefully, deliberately, meaningfully. This simple act changed everything. Because once a child is intentionally buried, the burial becomes evidence of thought, evidence of planning, evidence of emotional investment. The grave becomes a statement. The child mattered. The child's life mattered. The child's memory mattered. Archaeologists searching for the origins of burial often encounter these small graves with a sense of reverence. The individuals they uncover lived tens of thousands of years ago. Their names are lost forever. Their voices vanished into silence. Yet their graves continue speaking, not through words, through actions. Every detail tells part of the story. The position of the body, the shape of the pit, the surrounding objects, the location itself. Together, these clues help reconstruct events that occurred in a world beyond memory. One of the most striking aspects of early child burials is the effort involved. Even a small grave requires work. The earth must be disturbed. The body must be prepared. Time must be invested. In a society where every hour matters, this effort is significant. Why devote precious resources to the dead? The question lies at the heart of burial archaeology, and the answer may reveal something essential about humanity. Perhaps the simplest explanation is also the most powerful. People buried their dead because they cared, not because they expected a reward, not because a law required it, not because a priest commanded it, because grief demanded action, because doing nothing felt impossible. Modern grief often inspires ritual, funerals, memorials, moments of silence. These practices help the living cope with loss. Ancient burial may have served a similar purpose. The grave becomes a response to emotional pain, a way of acknowledging that something important has happened, a way of transforming chaos into order. Death creates disruption. Burial creates structure. Death creates uncertainty. Burial creates action. The process does not eliminate grief, but it gives grief a form. Perhaps that process began with children, because few losses strike more deeply than the loss of a young life. Imagine the scene. The community gathers. The child lies motionless. Parents remain nearby. Friends and relatives watch in silence. No formal religión exists. No written prayers exist. No established funeral traditions guide the moment. Everything must be invented. Everything must be discovered. Someone begins digging. Others help. The pit slowly takes shape. The child is placed inside, perhaps wrapped in animal skin, perhaps surrounded by familiar objects, perhaps accompanied by nothing at all. The details vary. The meaning remains. The community has chosen remembrance over abandonment, and that choice leaves a permanent mark on history. One reason child burials fascinate researchers is that they challenge purely practical explanations for burial. Practical concerns undoubtedly mattered. Bodies attract scavengers. Bodies decay. Bodies can create health risks. These realities may have encouraged burial. Yet practical concerns alone do not explain care. They do not explain positioning. They do not explain accompanying objects. They do not explain repeated patterns across different regions and different periods. Something more appears to be happening. Something emotional. Something symbolic. Something uniquely human. As scientists continue uncovering ancient graves, another pattern emerges. The dead are often treated as individuals, not merely bodies. Individuals. The distinction matters. A body is biological. An individual is social. A body occupies space. An individual occupies memory. When burial practices reflect personal identity, humanity has crossed an important threshold. The deceased continue to matter after death. Not physically, socially, emotionally, symbolically. This realization may have transformed human culture. Because once the dead remain important, relationships extend beyond mortality. Parents remember children. Children remember parents. Communities remember ancestors. Memory becomes a bridge connecting generations, and burial provides a physical anchor for that bridge. The grave marks a location where memory can reside, a place where stories accumulate, a place where absence becomes visible. Imagine returning to the same burial site years later. The child is gone. Only the grave remains. Yet the location preserves connection. People remember. People tell stories. People share experiences. The deceased continues influencing the living. This ability to maintain relationships across time may represent one of humanity's greatest cognitive achievements. It allows culture itself to exist. Knowledge passes from generation to generation. Traditions survive. Histories endure. Burial may have played a role in strengthening this process. By preserving memory physically, graves help preserve memory socially. Another fascinating possibility involves imagination. Humans possess an extraordinary capacity to imagine unseen realities. We imagine the future. We imagine distant places. We imagine invisible forces. We imagine lives continuing beyond immediate experience. This capacity may have influenced early burial practices. When a child dies, the body remains. Yet parents often struggle to accept that the relationship has ended completely. The child feels absent, but not entirely gone. Modern cultures express this feeling in countless ways. Stories of heaven, stories of ancestors, stories of spirits, stories of reunion after death. The specific beliefs differ. The underlying emotional impulse remains remarkably consistent. Humans resist the idea that relationships simply vanish. Perhaps the earliest burials emerged partly from this resistance, not necessarily from fully developed religious beliefs, but from a growing sense that the dead remained significant somehow. The grave acknowledges absence. At the same time, it preserves connection. This dual function may explain why burial became such a powerful cultural practice. It addresses both practical and emotional needs simultaneously. The body is cared for. The memory is preserved. The living can continue. The dead remain remembered. Thousands of years later, archaeologists encounter the results. A small skeleton resting in ancient soil. A silent witness to emotions that once transformed a community. The discovery creates a remarkable connection across time. The people responsible for the burial never imagined future scientists examining their actions. They never imagined museums, universities, research papers. Yet their choices survived. Their grief survived. Their compassion survived. Not directly, indirectly, encoded within the earth, preserved through stone and bone. Every child burial reminds us of something important. The origins of humanity are not merely technological, not merely biological, not merely intellectual. They are emotional. The first grave was not built by reason alone. It was built by feeling, by attachment, by loss, by the desire to honor someone who mattered. And that desire may have changed human history forever. Because once humans began treating the dead differently, new possibilities emerged. Memory became ritual. Ritual became tradition. Tradition became culture. Culture became civilization. The path was long. The transformation gradual. Yet somewhere along that path, another important development appeared. The dead began receiving gifts. Not practical gifts for the living. Gifts placed within graves. Objects carried into death itself. And among those objects, one substance appears again and again across prehistoric burial sites. A substance as red as blood. A substance that may hold clues to the earliest symbolic thinking in human history. Red ochre. In the next chapter, we will explore the mystery of red ochre burials. We will examine why ancient humans covered their dead with vivid crimson pigment. And we will ask whether these striking graves reveal the birth of symbolism, spirituality, and perhaps even the first hints of belief in life beyond death. Chapter 7. Red Ochre and the Color of Memory. If the first graves reveal the beginnings of compassion, then red ochre may reveal the beginnings of symbolism. At first glance, it seems like a simple substance, nothing more than colored earth, a reddish mineral found in rocks and soil across many parts of the world. Even today, you can hold a piece of ochre in your hand and scrape it against stone. A fine red powder appears, bright, striking, almost startling in its intensity. Yet tens of thousands of years ago, this humble mineral may have carried profound meaning. Again and again, archaeologists uncover ancient burials stained with red pigment, skeletons resting beneath layers of crimson dust, bones surrounded by traces of color, graves transformed by a substance deliberately placed beside the dead. The question is simple. Why? Why would prehistoric humans invest effort collecting ochre? Why transport it? Why grind it into powder? Why scatter it over the deceased? The answer remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Yet the mystery itself tells us something important. Because once humans begin decorating the dead, burial is no longer merely practical. Something else is happening. Something symbolic. Something imaginative. Something deeply human. Imagine standing beside a grave 30,000 years ago. The pit has already been prepared. The body rests inside. Family members gather nearby. The air is quiet. Perhaps no formal words are spoken. Perhaps language itself is still evolving toward greater complexity. Yet an action takes place that will echo across millennia. Someone reaches into a container. Perhaps a pouch made from animal hide. Perhaps a carved shell. Perhaps simply a folded piece of skin. Inside lies red ochre. The powder catches the light. It resembles fresh blood. It resembles sunset. It resembles fire. Slowly, deliberately, the pigment is scattered across the body. A cloud of red settles over the deceased. The grave changes. The scene changes. Death itself appears transformed. Why perform such an act? No one knows for certain. But several possibilities have fascinated researchers for generations. One theory centers on blood. Throughout human experience, blood has been closely associated with life. A living body contains blood. A dying body loses it. Blood symbolizes vitality, energy, and existence itself. Red ochre bears a striking resemblance to blood. Perhaps ancient people recognized this connection. Perhaps covering the dead with red pigment symbolically restored life. Not literally, symbolically. A final gesture acknowledging the life that had been lost. If this interpretation is correct, then red ochre may represent one of humanity's earliest symbolic languages. A color communicating ideas beyond words. Another possibility involves rebirth. Many later cultures associated red with birth and renewal. The color resembles both blood and the earth from which life emerges. Some archaeologists have noted that certain burials position bodies in curled, fetal-like postures. The deceased appears almost as though sleeping within the earth, almost as though returning to a womb. Combined with red ochre, these burials create a striking image. Death becomes connected with beginnings rather than endings. The individual returns to the earth from which life emerges. Whether prehistoric humans consciously held such beliefs remains impossible to prove. Yet the symbolism is difficult to ignore. Even if the meanings differed, the use of color itself suggests abstract thought. Humans were no longer responding only to practical realities. They were creating meaning. The importance of this development cannot be overstated. Symbolic thinking separates humans from every other known species. Animals can recognize objects. Humans transform objects into ideas. A piece of colored earth becomes a symbol. A grave becomes a statement. A ritual becomes a story. These abilities form the foundation of culture. Art, religion, language, civilization itself. And red ochre appears repeatedly at the very beginning of this journey. Archaeologists have discovered ochre use at sites scattered across enormous distances. Different groups, different regions, different periods. Yet the pattern persists. Again and again, humans collect red pigment. Again and again, they use it in contexts associated with identity, memory, and burial. This widespread behavior raises fascinating questions. Did different communities independently discover similar meanings? Did cultural traditions spread between groups? Or does red simply possess qualities that naturally attract human attention? Perhaps all three explanations contain elements of truth. After all, humans remain deeply responsive to color today. Red signals danger. Red signals passion. Red signals importance. It attracts attention instantly. A bright red object stands out against most natural environments. Ancient humans likely experienced similar reactions. Yet collecting ochre required effort. The pigment was not always available nearby. In some regions, people traveled significant distances to obtain it. This detail matters. People rarely expend valuable energy on meaningless tasks. The willingness to seek out ochre suggests that it held genuine importance. Whatever its exact significance, it mattered enough to justify the effort. And when something matters enough to accompany the dead, we should pay attention, because burial often reveals what a society values most. Modern funerals frequently include meaningful objects: photographs, flowers, personal possessions, religious symbols. These items help express emotions that words sometimes cannot capture. Perhaps ochre served a similar purpose: a visual language of grief, a symbolic gesture conveying respect, remembrance, or hope. If so, it represents a remarkable development. The dead are no longer merely being buried. They're being honored. The distinction is profound. As researchers examined ancient ochre burials, another realization emerged. The use of pigment often appears alongside other signs of symbolic behavior: beads, decorated objects, engraved patterns, carefully grave. These discoveries suggest that burial was becoming part of a larger cultural transformation. Humans were learning to think symbolically, to create meaning beyond immediate experience, to express ideas through objects and actions. This transformation may have unfolded gradually over thousands of years. One generation experiments with pigment. The next generation preserves the practice. Future generations expand upon it. Simple traditions become established rituals. The process resembles the development of language itself. Small innovations accumulate. Complex systems emerge. Eventually, entire cultures take shape. Red ochre may therefore represent more than a burial custom. It may represent evidence of a changing mind, a mind increasingly capable of abstraction, a mind increasingly concerned with invisible realities, a mind beginning to ask questions that still resonate today. What is life? What is death? What remains after someone is gone? The graves do not answer these questions directly. Instead, they reveal that humans have begun asking them. That alone is extraordinary. For most of Earth's history, life existed without contemplating its own mortality. Animals lived. Animals died. Nature continued. Then humans appeared. And somewhere along the way, humans began reflecting upon death itself. Burial became one expression of that reflection. Ochre became another. The two often appear together, as though the grave required more than a body, as though meaning itself had become part of the process. Some archaeologists caution against interpreting ochre too narrowly. They remind us that practical uses existed as well. Pigment could protect hides, decorate skin, mark objects. Its significance may have varied across regions and periods. This caution is important. The distant past rarely offers simple answers. Human behavior has always been complex. A single action can serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Red ochre might have been practical, decorative, and symbolic all at once. The possibilities are not mutually exclusive. Yet, even with such caution, the broader pattern remains striking. Ancient humans repeatedly chose to associate color with death. They repeatedly transformed graves into visual statements. That choice reveals intention, and intention reveals thought. Imagine an archaeologist uncovering an ochre burial after tens of thousands of years. The pigment still stains the soil. The bones remain surrounded by traces of red. For a moment, the distance between past and present narrows. The gesture feels recognizable, not because we understand every detail, but because we understand the impulse, the desire to do something, the desire to honor the dead, the desire to make loss visible. Humans continue expressing these impulses today. We place flowers on graves. We build memorials. We light candles. We create monuments. The forms differ. The underlying motivations remain surprisingly similar. The ancient ochre burial and a modern funeral share a common thread. Both transform grief into action. Both create meaning in the face of mortality. Both reflect humanity's refusal to treat death as merely biological. Instead, death becomes social, emotional, symbolic. The deceased continues occupying a place within the community, not physically, culturally. And that may be one of the most important developments in human history. Because once the dead remain culturally present, new possibilities emerge. Ancestors become important. Traditions become sacred. Memory becomes collective. Entire belief systems begin to take shape. Yet another question remains. Who was responsible for these early symbolic burials? Were they performed only by our own species, Homo sapiens? Or were other human relatives capable of the same behaviors? For many years, researchers assumed that symbolic thought belonged exclusively to modern humans. Then a series of astonishing discoveries challenged that assumption. Discoveries involving a different kind of human, a human often misunderstood, a human whose reputation has undergone a dramatic transformation. The Neanderthals. In the next chapter, we will journey into the world of these ancient relatives and examine one of the most important questions in prehistoric archaeology. Did Neanderthals bury their dead? And if they did, what does that reveal about the origins of compassion, symbolism, and humanity itself? Chapter 8. The Neanderthal Burials. For a long time, Neanderthals were portrayed as the losers of human history. The image was familiar. A heavy-browed figure wrapped in animal skins. Crude, brutish, barely capable of thought. A creature standing somewhere between ape and human. This image appeared in books, museums, and popular culture for generations. It was simple, easy to understand, and almost certainly wrong. Over the past century, discovery after discovery has forced scientists to reconsider who the Neanderthals really were. The more we learn about them, the more complicated the picture becomes. They were skilled hunters. They controlled fire. They manufactured sophisticated stone tools. They adapted to harsh Ice Age environments. They cared for injured individuals. And perhaps most surprisingly of all, they may have buried their dead. If true, that possibility changes everything. Because burial is not merely a practical act. As we have seen, burial often reflects compassion, memory, symbolism, and social connection. For decades, many researchers believed such behaviors belonged exclusively to modern humans. Burial seemed like evidence of a uniquely human mind. Then Neanderthal graves began to appear, and suddenly the boundary separating them from us became much harder to define. Imagine Europe and parts of Western Asia around 70,000 years ago. Modern humans have not yet spread widely across these regions. Instead, Neanderthals dominate the landscape. They occupy caves, travel across valleys, hunt large animals, raise families, endure brutal winters. For hundreds of thousands of years, they have successfully adapted to environments that would challenge even modern people. They are not temporary visitors. They are established inhabitants of the Ice Age world. And like all humans, they experience death. Children die. Huntas die. Elders die. Companions disappear. The same questions arise. What should happen to the dead? For many years, nobody knew the answer. Then archaeologists began uncovering evidence that seemed impossible to ignore. Skeletons appeared in positions suggesting deliberate placement. Bodies rested within depressions. Bones remained articulated. The surrounding sediments hinted at intentional burial. These discoveries sparked enormous excitement. If Neanderthals truly buried their dead, then symbolic behavior may have emerged far earlier than previously imagined. Perhaps compassion itself has deeper roots than anyone suspected. Yet the evidence proved controversial. Archaeology rarely provides certainty. Every discovery invites interpretation, and every interpretation invites debate. Some researchers argued that natural processes could explain the skeletons. Bodies might have become covered accidentally. Cave sediments might create misleading appearances. Nature can sometimes imitate intention. Others disagreed. They pointed to body positions, burial pits, patterns repeated across multiple sites. Taken together, they believed the evidence strongly supported intentional burial. The debate continues today. But one thing has become increasingly clear. The old stereotype of the unintelligent Neanderthal no longer survives scrutiny. Regardless of where one stands on specific burial sites, Neanderthals were clearly far more sophisticated than earlier generations assumed. To appreciate why this matters, we need to understand who they were. Neanderthals were not our ancestors in the traditional sense. Instead, they were close relatives, a sister branch of humanity. Their evolutionary line separated from ours hundreds of thousands of years ago. From that point onward, both groups followed different paths. Yet the separation was not absolute. Modern genetic studies reveal that many people alive today carry Neanderthal DNA. At some point, modern humans and Neanderthals met. They interacted. They had children together. Their histories became intertwined. This realization has transformed our understanding of human evolution. Humanity was never a single isolated line. It was a complex family tree. Multiple human species existed simultaneously. Multiple forms of intelligence. Multiple ways of living. And perhaps multiple ways of understanding death. Imagine standing beside a Neanderthal burial. The scene might feel surprisingly familiar. A community gathers. A body lies motionless. Family members remain nearby. The living confront loss. They confront grief. They confront absence. Those emotional realities transcend species labels. Neanderthals loved their children, relied upon companions, maintained social bonds. The archaeological evidence suggests exactly that. Some of the most remarkable discoveries involve individuals who survived severe disabilities. One Neanderthal lived for years despite injuries that would have made independent survival nearly impossible. Another suffered extensive physical limitations, yet continued living long after the damage occurred. These individuals survived because others cared for them. Someone shared food. Someone provided protection. Someone invested effort. The implications are profound. Compassion was not uniquely modern human. Caregiving existed among Neanderthals as well. And if compassion existed, burial becomes easier to imagine. After all, caring for someone during life naturally raises questions about what happens after death. The emotional bonds do not vanish instantly. The relationship leaves traces. Memories remain. Grief remains. The dead continue maturing. Perhaps Neanderthal burials emerged from exactly these dynamics. Not from abstract philosophy, not from organized religion, but from relationships, from affection, from loss. One of the fascinating aspects of Neanderthal archaeology is how often it challenges assumptions. Researchers once believed that art belonged exclusively to modern humans. Then evidence of possible Neanderthal symbolic behavior appeared. Researchers once believed that sophisticated social care belonged exclusively to modern humans. Then injured Neanderthals revealed otherwise. Researchers once believed that burial belonged exclusively to modern humans. Then graves enter the discussion. Again and again, the distinction between them and us grows less clear. Perhaps this should not surprise us. Neanderthals were human, not identical to us, but undeniably human in many meaningful ways. They laughed, feared, learned, cooperated, adapted, raised families, faced mortality. The closer we look, the more familiar they become. And nowhere is this familiarity more striking than in the treatment of the dead. Imagine a Neanderthal child dying during a harsh winter. The parents experience grief. The community feels the loss. What happens next? We cannot know precisely. But archaeological discoveries suggest that in at least some cases, the body received special attention. Perhaps a grave was prepared. Perhaps the deceased was placed carefully into the earth. Perhaps family members remained nearby. Perhaps memories were shared. The details are lost. The possibility remains. And that possibility carries enormous significance. Because burial represents a psychological milestone, it requires seeing the deceased as more than a physical object. The body is no longer useful in a practical sense. It continues to matter. Why? Because the individual mattered. Because relationships mattered. Because memory mattered. These ideas lie at the heart of human social life. If Neanderthals participated in similar behaviors, then many aspects of humanity may predate our own species. The roots run deeper than we imagined, much deeper. As archaeologists continued excavating Neanderthal sites throughout the 20th century, one location became especially famous: a cave hidden within rugged mountains, a site that would spark decades of debate, a site that would become synonymous with Neanderthal burial. Its name was Shanidar. There, researchers uncovered a series of skeletons unlike anything previously known. Some appeared intentionally buried. One individual showed evidence of severe disabilities and long-term care. Another became associated with one of the most famous archaeological controversies ever recorded: the so-called flower burial. The idea captured public imagination immediately. Had Neanderthals placed flowers beside their dead? Had they performed funeral rituals? Had they expressed symbolic emotions once thought uniquely human? The discovery promised extraordinary answers. Yet it also generated extraordinary questions. Because archaeology rarely delivers simple conclusions, the evidence at Shanidar would become one of the most debated topics in prehistoric research. Supporters saw proof of compassion and ritual. Skeptics urged caution. The truth proved more complicated than either side expected. But before we explore that controversy, it is worth pausing to appreciate what the debate itself reveals. 50 years earlier, few scientists would even have considered the possibility. Neanderthals were assumed incapable of such behavior. Now researchers argued passionately about the details of their burial customs. The change was remarkable. The image of the brutish caveman was collapsing. In its place emerged something far more interesting: a fellow human, different from us, yet recognizably similar. A being capable of caring for others. A being capable of memory. A being perhaps capable of honoring the dead. As we descend deeper into the story of burial, the distinctions between species begin to fade. What remains are universal experiences: love, loss, compassion, grief, the emotions that bind human communities together. Those emotions may have inspired some of the first graves ever dug. Whether by modern humans or Neanderthals, the underlying impulse appears familiar: the desire to care, the desire to remember, the refusal to simply walk away. And nowhere is that possibility more vividly illustrated than at Shanidar Cave, a place where one burial would ignite a debate lasting generations, a place where ancient pollen grains would inspire theories about flowers, rituals, and the emotional lives of Neanderthals, a place where the origins of burial would become more mysterious than ever. In the next chapter, we will enter Shanidar Cave itself. We will meet the individuals buried there. We will examine the famous flower burial, and we will explore one of archaeology's most enduring questions. Did Neanderthals place flowers beside their dead? Or does the truth tell an even more fascinating story? Chapter 9: The Mystery of Shanidar. High in the rugged mountains of what is now northern Iraq, there's a cave that changed the way we think about our ancient relatives. At first glance, it seems unremarkable: a dark opening in a limestone cliff, a shelter overlooking valleys shaped by wind, water, and time. For thousands of years, travelers may have passed nearby without realizing what lay hidden beneath the cave floor. But beneath layers of soil and stone rested a remarkable collection of human stories. Stories preserved not in writing, not in monuments, but in bone. The cave is known as Shanidar, and few archaeological sites have generated more fascination, controversy, and debate. Because inside Shanidar Cave, researchers uncovered evidence suggesting that Neanderthals may have treated their dead with care, perhaps even with ceremony. The discoveries would challenge long-held assumptions about intelligence, compassion, and what it means to be human. Imagine the cave as it appeared 60,000 years ago. The Ice Age still dominates much of the world. Cold winds sweep across the landscape. Animals move through valleys below. Within the cave, a small Neanderthal community gathers around fires. Children play. Adults prepare tools. Food is shared. Conversations unfold in languages forever lost to history. Life continues much as it has for countless generations. Then death arrives, and with it decisions. Decisions that would echo across tens of thousands of years. The modern story of Shanidar begins in the mid-20th century. Archaeologists excavating the cave discovered something extraordinary. Not one Neanderthal skeleton. Several. Multiple individuals buried within the same site, each offering clues about Neanderthal life and death. One skeleton in particular attracted immediate attention. Known today as Shanidar 1, this individual revealed evidence of severe physical challenges. The left arm had been badly injured and partially lost. The individual may have suffered hearing impairment. Other injuries suggested a difficult life marked by hardship and trauma. Yet despite these limitations, the person survived for years, possibly decades. This survival tells a powerful story. Someone cared. Again and again, the evidence points in the same direction. The individual could not have managed alone. Food must have been shared. Protection must have been provided. Support must have been ongoing. The community invested in a vulnerable member. This discovery transformed perceptions of Neanderthals. It revealed social care, compassion, patience, qualities once thought unique to modern humans. But Shanidar had more surprises waiting. Another skeleton would become even more famous, or perhaps more accurately, more controversial. This individual became known as Shanidar 4. And around Shanidar 4 emerged one of the most enduring debates in archaeology. The debate began with pollen. Tiny grains of pollen, the kind most people never notice, the kind that usually disappear without a trace. Yet under certain conditions, pollen can survive for astonishing lengths of time. When researchers examined soil surrounding Shanidar 4, they discovered unusually high concentrations of pollen from several flowering plants. The finding was unexpected, and it inspired an extraordinary hypothesis. Perhaps flowers had been placed in the grave. Perhaps Neanderthals had buried their dead with floral offerings. The idea captured imaginations instantly. Newspapers reported the discovery. Books celebrated it. The public embraced it. The image was irresistible. A group of Neanderthals gathering flowers for a funeral. A moment of tenderness preserved across 60,000 years. A gesture so familiar that it seemed to erase the distance between ancient and modern humanity. The burial became famous as the flower burial. For many people, it symbolized the emotional depth of Neanderthal life. Here, perhaps, was evidence that they mourned their dead in ways we immediately recognize. Flowers are often associated with funerals today. They express grief, respect, love, memory. Finding similar behavior among Neanderthals felt profoundly moving. Yet archaeology rarely provides simple answers. And soon, questions emerged. Lots of questions. Were the flowers really placed there intentionally? Could another explanation account for the pollen? Researchers began examining alternative possibilities. One suggestion involved animals. Certain burrowing rodents collect seeds and plant materials. Over time, their activities can introduce pollen into archaeological deposits. Perhaps the pollen arrived naturally rather than through human action. Other scientists pointed to environmental processes. Wind can carry pollen. Water can redistribute it. Natural accumulation sometimes creates misleading patterns. The evidence, they argued, was not conclusive. As the debate continued, the certainty surrounding the flower burial began to fade. Some researchers remained convinced. Others became skeptical. Today, many archaeologists approach the claim cautiously. The pollen is real. The interpretation remains uncertain. Perhaps flowers were intentionally placed in the grave. Perhaps they were not. The truth may never be known. Yet something fascinating happened along the way. Even as doubts emerged regarding the flowers, the broader significance of Shanidar remained, because the cave continued providing evidence of deliberate treatment of the dead. The exact details might be debated. The larger picture remained compelling. Neanderthals clearly cared for one another. Neanderthals clearly maintained complex social relationships. Neanderthals may well have buried their dead intentionally. Whether flowers were involved or not, the cave revealed a level of sophistication that earlier generations had failed to recognize. And perhaps that realization matters more than the flowers themselves. Sometimes archaeological discoveries become symbols. The flower burial became a symbol of a larger idea. The idea that humanity is not defined solely by technology, not solely by intelligence, but by relationships, by empathy, by the capacity to care. The flowers captured public attention because they represented something emotionally familiar. A funeral gesture, a final act of kindness, a moment of remembrance. Even if the specific interpretation remains uncertain, the emotional impulse behind it resonates deeply, because burial itself already implies many of those qualities. Imagine standing inside Shanidar Cave 60,000 years ago. The firelight flickers against stone walls. The community gathers quietly. One of their own has died. Perhaps they prepare a grave. Perhaps they lower the body carefully. Perhaps family members remain nearby. No cameras record the scene. No written accounts preserve it. Only fragments survive. Yet those fragments suggest something important. The dead were not ignored. The dead were not treated as mere biological remains. They mattered, and that realization carries us closer to understanding the origins of burial. The first graves were not necessarily grand religious statements. They may have been acts of social connection, acts rooted in everyday relationships. A parent caring for a child, friends mourning a companion, a community honoring one of its members. Over time, these actions may have acquired deeper meanings. Symbols accumulate, traditions develop, stories emerge. Eventually, entire belief systems grow from such foundations. But the beginning may have been surprisingly simple. A refusal to abandon the dead, a desire to remember, a recognition that relationships do not vanish instantly. Shanidar also reminds us of an important lesson about archaeology itself. The past is rarely clear. Evidence survives in fragments. Interpretations evolve. Certainty remains elusive. Each discovery raises new questions. The flower burial may never be resolved completely. Future research may support the idea. Future research may challenge it further. Such uncertainty is part of the scientific process. What matters is not finding perfect answers. What matters is following the evidence wherever it leads. And the evidence from Shanidar leads toward a fascinating conclusion. Neanderthals were not the primitive creatures once imagined. They possessed rich social lives. They cared for one another. They responded to death in meaningful ways. Their world contained complexity, emotion, memory, perhaps even ritual. The cave preserves traces of all these things. Not enough to reconstruct every detail. Enough to glimpse a humanity that once seemed impossible. As archaeologists continued investigating ancient burials across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, similar patterns emerged elsewhere. careful body placement, evidence of social concern, possible symbolic behavior. The story was growing larger than Shanidar alone. The origins of burial appeared increasingly ancient, increasingly widespread, increasingly connected to the development of the human mind itself. Yet another question remained. Why did burial become such a powerful practice in the first place? What need did it fulfill? Why did communities repeatedly invest effort in caring for the dead? To answer that question, we must examine another side of the story. Not compassion, not symbolism, fear. Because throughout history, the dead have inspired not only love and remembrance, they have also inspired anxiety, uncertainty, and sometimes terror. Perhaps the first graves were shaped not only by affection for the dead, but by concerns about what might happen if the dead remained among the living. In the next chapter, we will explore humanity's ancient relationship with death, decay, and fear. We will examine how practical concerns and emotional concerns may have combined to create the first burial traditions. And we will discover why the origins of burial may lie at the intersection of compassion and caution. Chapter 10. Fear of the Dead. When we think about the origins of burial, we often imagine love. We imagine grieving families. We imagine compassion. We imagine sorrow transformed into ritual. And certainly, those emotions were almost certainly part of the story. But there's another possibility we must consider. A possibility less comforting. A possibility that has shaped human behavior throughout history. Fear. Not fear of dying. Fear of the dead themselves. At first, this idea may seem strange. How could people fear those they loved? How could grief and fear exist together? Yet throughout human history, they frequently have. Many cultures honor the dead while simultaneously treating them with caution. They mourn their ancestors, yet they also create rules governing how the dead should be handled. They perform rituals designed to protect the living. They establish boundaries between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Love and fear often coexist. Respect and anxiety often coexist. The same may have been true for our distant ancestors. To understand why, imagine encountering a dead body in a prehistoric world. A companion who only yesterday walked beside you. Someone who spoke. Someone who laughed. Someone who shared meals around the fire. Now they lie motionless. Their eyes no longer respond. Their chest no longer rises and falls. Something fundamental has changed. The transformation is immediate and deeply unsettling. Modern people experience similar reactions. Even when death is expected, the presence of a corpse often feels different from the presence of a living person. The body remains physically familiar, yet emotionally unfamiliar. The individual seems both present and absent at the same time. This contradiction creates discomfort. Ancient humans likely experienced the same sensation. Their minds were human. Their emotional responses were human. They may not have understood death scientifically, but they certainly recognized its power. And unlike us, they lived much closer to the realities of death and decomposition. A dead body changes quickly. Within hours, visible signs appear. Within days, the transformation becomes impossible to ignore. The familiar person becomes increasingly unfamiliar. Skin changes. Odors emerge. The body begins returning to the natural world. For people without modern medical knowledge, this process must have seemed mysterious, perhaps even frightening. What exactly was happening? Where had the person gone? Why did the body change? Could whatever caused death affect others? Could death itself somehow spread? These questions would have been difficult to answer. Ancient humans possessed no germ theory, no microbiology, no understanding of infection. They observed outcomes without understanding mechanisms. And when people lack explanations, imagination often fills the gaps. This does not mean early humans were irrational. Far from it. They were intelligent observers of their environment. But certain phenomena remained difficult to understand without scientific tools. Death was one of them. A person alive one day could be dead the next. The reasons were not always obvious. The consequences could be devastating. In such circumstances, caution becomes sensible. Moving the dead away from living spaces may have begun as a practical response, a way of reducing unpleasant sights and smells, a way of avoiding scavengers, a way of maintaining safety. These practical concerns alone could encourage burial. But practical actions often acquire symbolic meanings over time. A body moved for practical reasons may later be moved for emotional reasons as well. The two motivations can become intertwined. Consider fire. Humans first used fire for warmth and cooking. Later, fire acquired symbolic significance in countless cultures. Practicality and symbolism coexisted. The same may have happened with burial. A practical solution gradually became a meaningful ritual. Fear may have played a role in that transformation. Throughout recorded history, many societies developed beliefs about restless dead, ghosts, spirits, ancestors, supernatural beings connected to deceased individuals. The details vary dramatically from culture to culture, yet the underlying pattern appears again and again. The dead are respected, but they're also potentially dangerous. Boundaries must be maintained. Special actions must be taken. Could the roots of these ideas stretch back into prehistory? Possibly. Even without formal supernatural beliefs, early humans may have felt uneasy around the dead. The corpse represented a mystery, a reminder of mortality, a visible example of something everyone would eventually experience. Few things capture human attention more powerfully than mortality. Even today, people often avoid thinking about death. We know it is inevitable, yet we struggle to confront it directly. Ancient humans may have felt similar tensions. The dead forced them to confront uncomfortable realities. Burial provided a way to manage those realities. The body was removed from daily life, placed within the earth, separated from the living. The community could continue. In this sense, burial may have served psychological needs as well as practical ones. It created closure, a sense that something had been completed, a difficult transition had been managed. The living could move forward. The dead occupied a different space. The boundary had been established. Interestingly, some of the earliest burials suggest exactly this concern with separation. Bodies are often placed in distinct locations, sometimes within pits, sometimes within caves, sometimes beneath layers of sediment. The earth itself becomes a barrier, a physical division between life and death. This division may have carried emotional significance. It may also have carried symbolic significance. The dead were no longer among the living, yet they were not entirely gone. They remained nearby, remembered, accessible through memory. The grave created a unique balance. Distance without complete abandonment. Separation without forgetting. This balance may explain why burial became so widespread. It satisfied multiple needs simultaneously. Practical needs, emotional needs, social needs, perhaps even spiritual needs. The more researchers study burial practices around the world, the more they discover this complexity. Rarely does a single explanation account for everything. Human behavior is layered. Motivations overlap. Love and fear can exist together. Respect and caution can exist together. Grief and practicality can exist together. The first burial likely emerged from exactly this mixture. Imagine a prehistoric community facing the death of a respected elder. The group mourns. The loss hurts. At the same time, the body cannot remain indefinitely. Something must be done. A grave provides a solution. The deceased receives care. The community expresses respect. The practical problem is addressed. The emotional problem is addressed. The social problem is addressed. One action serves many purposes. Over generations, repeated actions become traditions. Traditions become expectations. Expectations become rituals. Eventually, people may no longer remember the original motivations. The ritual acquires a life of its own. This process occurs constantly throughout human history. Practices outlast their origins. Burial traditions likely evolved in similar ways. The earliest graves may have been relatively simple. a practical and emotional response to death. Later generations added symbolism, added meaning, added ceremony. The result became increasingly sophisticated. Yet the foundations remained rooted in fundamental human experiences: loss, memory, concern, fear, compassion. Another factor deserves consideration as well: predators. The prehistoric world contained many scavengers: hyenas, wolves, large cats, animals capable of detecting carcasses from considerable distances. A body left exposed could attract unwanted attention, not only to the deceased, to the entire community. Removing or burying bodies may therefore have offered practical protection. Again, practicality and symbolism may have reinforced one another. A grave protected the living while honoring the dead. The same action achieved both goals. This dual function appears repeatedly throughout human cultural evolution. The most successful traditions often satisfy multiple needs at once. Burial seems to be one of those traditions. As the practice spread and developed, another transformation occurred. Communities began creating places associated specifically with the dead, not isolated graves, collections of graves, locations where memory accumulated over generations, locations where ancestors remained present within the landscape. This development would prove enormously important, because once graves become concentrated in specific places, the relationship between the living and the dead changes again. The dead become part of community identity, part of collective memory, part of the physical world people inhabit. The first steps towards cemeteries. The first steps toward ancestor worship. The first steps toward sacred landscapes. Yet all of those developments still lie ahead. For now, we remain in a world where burial is new. A world where humans are only beginning to explore what death means. A world where every grave represents an experiment, a new idea, a new response to an ancient problem. How should the living relate to the dead? No single answer existed. Different communities developed different traditions, different beliefs, different practices. But beneath those differences, certain themes appear again and again: compassion, memory, fear, respect, the desire to create meaning in the face of mortality. Perhaps that desire is one of the defining features of humanity itself, because death confronts every human society with the same challenge. Life ends. Relationships do not feel as though they should. The grave emerges as a response to that tension, a way of acknowledging reality while preserving connection, a way of accepting loss without embracing oblivion. And as burial practices became more common, something remarkable happened. The dead began influencing the living in new ways, not through physical presence, through memory, through stories, through identity. The deceased became ancestors, and ancestors would eventually shape entire cultures. In the next chapter, we will explore how burial helped create one of humanity's most powerful inventions: collective memory. We will discover how graves transformed individuals into ancestors, and how remembering the dead may have changed human society forever. Chapter 11. The Birth of Memory. Long before history was written, before kingdoms carved their achievements into stone, before scribes recorded the names of rulers and heroes, humanity discovered a different way of preserving the past. Memory. Not memory as we think of it today. Not books. Not archives. Not photographs. Instead, living memory. Stories passed from one person to another. Experiences shared around fires. Names spoken by people who refused to forget. And perhaps nowhere was this process more powerful than in the treatment of the dead. Because burial does something remarkable. It transforms absence into presence. It creates a place where memory can live. Imagine a world without graves. A person dies. Their body disappears. Over time, physical traces vanish. The landscape changes. New generations arrive. Eventually, nothing remains. The individual fades completely from the world. Now imagine a world with burial. The person still dies. The loss remains. Yet something different happens. A location endures. A specific place becomes connected to a specific life. People can return. People can remember. People can tell stories. The grave becomes more than a resting place. It becomes a memory anchor. And that may have changed human history. To understand why, we must consider one of the most extraordinary features of the human mind. Humans can remember people they cannot see. This ability seems ordinary because we use it constantly. You can think about a friend who lives far away. You can remember a grandparent who died years ago. You can imagine individuals who are not physically present. Yet this cognitive skill is astonishing. It allows relationships to persist beyond immediate experience. It allows communities to extend through time. It allows the dead to remain socially alive long after biological death. Ancient humans possessed this ability just as we do. A hunter who died during winter might still be remembered years later. Children might hear stories about him. His achievements might be retold. His personality might become part of community identity. The physical person is gone. The social person remains. Burial may have strengthened this process. By creating a permanent location associated with the deceased, graves help preserve memory. They provide a focal point, a destination for stories, a reminder that someone once existed. Even the simplest grave performs this function. A shallow pit, a marked location, a place known to the community. It says something profound. Someone mattered here. Someone is remembered here. This development may seem subtle, but its consequences are enormous. Because memory is not merely personal. Memory can become collective. Imagine a child growing up in a prehistoric community. The child never met certain individuals who died years earlier. Yet through stories, those individuals remain familiar. The child learns their names, learns their accomplishments, learns their place within the community. Memory crosses generations. The dead continue influencing the living. This process lies at the heart of culture. Knowledge survives because memory survives. Traditions survive because memory survives. Identity survives because memory survives. Burial may therefore have contributed to something far larger than funeral practice. It may have helped humans organize the past itself. For most animals, experience ends with death. Information disappears. Humans are different. We preserve information socially. One generation teaches the next. The deceased continue shaping the future through memory. A grave can strengthen that connection. The location becomes part of the teaching process, part of the story, part of the landscape. Archaeologists sometimes describe burial sites as places where communities negotiate their relationship with time. The phrase may sound complicated, but the idea is simple. Graves connect past, present, and future. The dead belong to the past. The mourners belong to the present. Future generations inherit the memory. All three become linked. This connection may have emerged surprisingly early. Imagine returning to a burial site years after the grave was created. Children who were infants during the burial are now older. New members have joined the group. Some original mourners may themselves have died. Yet the grave remains. The location continues telling a story. The memory survives. Repeated visits reinforce that survival. Repeated stories reinforce that survival. Over time, the deceased becomes more than an individual. They become part of collective identity. This transformation marks the beginning of something profoundly important: the birth of ancestry. Today, ancestry feels natural. Most people know they descend from earlier generations. Many feel connected to grandparents, great-grandparents, and distant relatives. Some cultures place enormous importance on ancestors, others less so. But the underlying concept appears almost universal. People come from somewhere. People belong to a chain extending backward through time. Yet ancestry itself had to be invented. At some point, humans began seeing themselves not merely as individuals, but as members of continuing lineages. Burial may have played a role in that development. A grave preserves evidence that someone came before. A collection of graves preserves evidence that many came before. The landscape itself begins recording family history, not through writing, through memory and place. Imagine a valley where generations have buried their dead. Parents, grandparents, children, companions. Each grave represents a story. Together, they form a community history. People walking through the area encounter reminders of those who lived before them. The dead remain present within the environment, not physically, culturally. This presence can be powerful. Many later societies developed elaborate traditions centered on ancestors. Ancestors offered guidance, protection, authority, identity. Such traditions may have deep prehistoric roots. The first ancestor was simply a remembered dead person. The first ancestor tradition was simply a community choosing not to forget. Burial helps make that choice visible. It transforms memory into landscape. As human populations grew and social structures became more complex, the importance of memory increased. Small groups could rely on personal recollection. Larger communities required shared traditions. Stories became increasingly valuable. Who founded the group? Who discovered important resources? Who survived great hardships? Who taught crucial skills? These stories help communities define themselves. The dead became central characters. Memory became a social resource. Burial sites became repositories of identity. This process may explain why certain locations acquired special significance. Some places accumulated generations of burials. Generation after generation returned to the same areas. The result was not merely a cemetery. It was a memory landscape, a physical record of social continuity. The people buried there connected the present community to its past, and that connection offered stability, especially in uncertain times. Imagine facing a difficult winter. Food is scarce. Conditions are harsh. The future feels uncertain. Remembering previous generations can provide reassurance. Others endured similar challenges. Others survived. Others passed down knowledge. The dead become sources of strength, not because they are physically present, because memory itself is powerful. This realization may have encouraged increasingly elaborate burial practices. The more important memory became, the more important graves became. Not necessarily larger, not necessarily more impressive, more meaningful. The grave evolved from a place of disposal into a place of remembrance. This transformation represents a major shift in human consciousness. Humans were no longer responding only to immediate circumstances. They were actively preserving the past. They were creating continuity across generations. They were building cultural memory. And cultural memory would become one of humanity's greatest advantages. Animals inherit information primarily through genetics. Humans inherit information through culture. Culture allows knowledge to accumulate. Each generation begins where the previous generation ended. Skills improve. Ideas spread. Traditions develop. Civilization eventually emerges. But civilization depends upon memory. And memory depends upon mechanisms for preservation. Burial may have been one of the earliest such mechanisms. Not because graves store information directly, because they encourage remembering. They create places where stories gather, places where identities persist, places where the dead remain socially meaningful. The emotional dimension should not be overlooked. Memory is not merely informational. It is emotional. People remember those they love. People remember those who shaped their lives. The earliest graves likely reflect exactly these attachments. The desire to maintain connection. The refusal to allow someone to vanish completely. This impulse remains familiar today. Modern memorials serve similar purposes. Photographs, monuments, family stories, all represent efforts to preserve memory. Ancient graves may be part of the same continuum. Different methods, similar motivations. The desire to keep the past alive. And once memory becomes established as a cultural force, Another question naturally follows. If the dead remain important, where exactly are they? Not physically, conceptually. What becomes of a person after death? Do they continue existing somehow? Do they observe the living? Do they travel elsewhere? Do they remain connected to their descendants? These questions eventually gave rise to some of humanity's most influential ideas. Ideas about spirits, ancestors, afterlives, religion. The earliest graves may not provide clear answers, but they suggest the questions were beginning to emerge. Humans were no longer treating death as a simple biological event. Death had become meaningful. Memory had become powerful. The dead had become socially present. And from these developments, entirely new ways of understanding the world would eventually grow. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the deepest mysteries in human history. When did humans first begin wondering what happens after death? And how might the earliest graves reveal the origins of that question? Chapter 12. Why humans began to mourn. At some point in the distant past, something extraordinary happened. Not a new tool, not a new weapon, not a new hunting strategy. Something far less visible. A change inside the human mind. A change in how humans experience loss. A change in how they understood one another. A change that would eventually lead to mourning. Today, mourning feels natural. When someone we love dies, we grieve. We remember. We feel absence. We experience sadness, longing, confusion, and sometimes even anger. These emotions are so familiar that we rarely question them. Yet mourning itself is remarkable, because mourning means that a relationship continues after death. Not physically, emotionally. The body is gone. The bond remains. Somewhere in prehistory, humans began responding to death in this uniquely powerful way. And understanding why may help explain the origins of burial itself. Imagine a small group of hunter-gatherers moving through an Ice Age landscape. Their world is dangerous. Food is uncertain. Every member of the community matters. Success depends on cooperation. Over thousands of generations, humans evolved to form strong social connections. Parents bonded with children. Partners bonded with one another. Friends relied upon friends. Communities depended upon trust. These bonds were not optional. They increased survival. A child cared for by loving adults had a better chance of reaching adulthood. An injured hunter, supported by companions, had a better chance of recovery. Groups with stronger cooperation often outperformed groups with weaker cooperation. Natural selection favored social attachment. As a result, humans became deeply connected creatures. Our brains evolved to value relationships, to seek them, to protect them, to maintain them. And once those attachments exist, loss becomes inevitable. The stronger the bond, the deeper the grief. This principle likely applied just as strongly 50,000 years ago as it does today. Ancient humans loved, and because they loved, they mourned. The archaeological record cannot directly preserve grief. No skeleton records tears. No grave preserves heartbreak. Yet the evidence allows us to infer something important. The actions surrounding death changed over time. Bodies received increasing attention. Burials became more deliberate. Memory became more important. These developments suggest emotional investment. People were not simply managing corpses. They were responding to loss. Modern psychology offers fascinating insights into why mourning occurs. Human relationships create mental models. When someone becomes part of our lives, our brain continuously expects their presence. We anticipate conversations, shared experiences, future interactions. When death occurs, those expectations remain. Part of the mind continues searching for someone who is no longer there. The result is grief. A painful process of adapting to absence. Ancient humans likely experienced similar psychological realities. Their brains were fundamentally like ours. They formed expectations. They built relationships. They imagined futures involving people they loved. Death disrupted those expectations. Mourning emerged as a response. This may explain why burial became so meaningful. Because burial provides structure during emotional chaos. It creates an event, a process, a transition, something tangible that helps the living confront an intangible loss. Imagine a parent losing a child in prehistory. The grief would be overwhelming. The future they imagine disappears instantly. The routines of daily life are shattered. The emotional pain demands expression. What can they do? They cannot reverse death. They cannot erase the loss. But they can act. They can prepare a grave. They can place the child carefully within the earth. They can create a location for memory. The action does not remove grief. It gives grief direction. This function remains visible in funerary traditions today. Across cultures, rituals help people navigate mourning. The specific customs differ. The psychological purpose often remains similar. Ritual provides order, meaning, community support. Ancient burial may have served exactly these functions, long before organized religion, long before formal ceremonies. Humans may have discovered that certain actions help process loss. The first funeral may have been astonishingly simple. A gathering, agrave, a moment of shared remembrance. Yet even simple rituals can be powerful, because rituals transform emotions into actions, and actions are easier to manage than feelings. Another fascinating aspect of mourning involves memory. When someone dies, memory often becomes more important, not less. People tell stories, recall experiences, share recollections. The deceased remains present through remembrance. This tendency appears deeply rooted in human psychology. We resist allowing important relationships to vanish completely. Instead, we preserve them symbolically, through stories, through objects, through places, through graves. The burial site becomes part of this process, a location where memory can return repeatedly, a location where grief and remembrance intersect. Imagine a community returning to a burial site months after a death. The individual is gone, yet the grave remains. The location encourages reflection. Stories are told again. Memories are refreshed. The deceased continues shaping the social world. This continuation may explain why burial became increasingly common. It fulfills emotional needs that simple abandonment cannot satisfy. Abandonment ends the relationship abruptly. Burial allows gradual transition, a balance between letting go and remembering. Humans appear uniquely skilled at maintaining such balances. We understand absence, yet we preserve connection. We accept mortality, yet we create memory. Mourning exists precisely because we can hold both realities simultaneously. The person is gone. The person still matters. This dual awareness may be one of the defining features of human consciousness. It requires sophisticated cognitive abilities, memory, imagination, empathy, symbolic thought, all working together, and burial reflects the operation of all these abilities at once. Some researchers believe mourning may have contributed significantly to cultural evolution. At first glance, this idea seems surprising. How could grief influence human development? The answer lies in social cohesion. When communities mourn together, they reinforce relationships. Shared grief creates solidarity. People support one another. Communities become stronger. The loss of one member becomes a collective experience rather than an individual burden. Burial rituals may have encouraged exactly this process. A death affects everyone. A burial brings everyone together. The community responds as a unit. Over time, such practices strengthen social bonds, and stronger social bonds improve survival. Thus, mourning may possess evolutionary significance as well as emotional significance. It helps groups remain connected during difficult times. This possibility highlights an important theme running throughout the history of burial. The treatment of the dead often serves the living. Not selfishly, socially, burials help communities cope, help communities remember, help communities maintain identity. The deceased receives honor. The living receives support. Both outcomes matter. As mourning became integrated into human culture, another transformation occurred. The dead began occupying increasingly important places within collective imagination. No longer merely remembered individuals. They became ancestors, sources of wisdom, sources of identity, sources of continuity. This shift marks the beginning of ancestor consciousness, the realization that current generations exist within a larger chain extending through time. Burial helped make that chain visible. A grave reminds the living that others came before, that present communities are built upon past lives, that death does not erase significance. Imagine a child growing up among burial sites associated with previous generations. The child hears stories, learns names, discovers family connections. The dead become part of the child's world despite never having met them. Memory extends beyond personal experience. Ancestry emerges. This development may have profound implications, because once people begin thinking about ancestors, they begin thinking differently about themselves. Identity expands. Individuals belong not only to the present community, they belong to a historical continuum. Past, present, and future become linked. Burial plays a crucial role in creating that linkage. The grave serves as a physical reminder of continuity, and continuity naturally inspires questions. If ancestors remain important, where are they? What happens to them after death? Do they continue existing somehow? Can they influence the living? Can they observe descendants? Such questions eventually become central to religious thought. But before organized religion emerges, there is something simpler. Wonder, curiosity, the human tendency to ask questions that have no obvious answers. Death inspires such questions naturally. The body remains. The person disappears. Where did they go? Why did they leave? Can they return? The earliest graves may not reveal specific beliefs, yet they reveal that humans have begun treating these questions seriously. The dead mattered. Their fate mattered. Their memory mattered. And from that realization, entirely new ways of understanding existence would eventually emerge. The origins of mourning, therefore, represent more than emotional history. They represent intellectual history. The moment humans began grappling with mortality in increasingly sophisticated ways, the moment death became more than an event. It became a mystery demanding explanation, a mystery inspiring ritual, a mystery inspiring belief. The graves preserve traces of that transformation, silent evidence that ancient humans were wrestling with questions we still ask today. Questions about love, loss, memory, meaning, and ultimately, questions about what lies beyond death itself. In the next chapter, we will explore how the first graves may have transformed isolated families into enduring communities. We will discover how burial grounds became gathering places for memory and identity. And we will see how the dead helped unite the living in ways that changed human society forever. Chapter 13. When the dead united the living. If you could travel back into the distant prehistoric world, one thing would immediately stand out. Everything is temporary. Camps appear and disappear. Hunting grounds change with the seasons. Animal herds migrate. Families move. Rivers shift their courses. Storms reshape the landscape. Nothing stays still for long. For early humans, mobility was often essential for survival. People followed food, followed water, followed opportunity. Entire communities could relocate repeatedly throughout a single year. Yet amid all this movement, something unusual began to emerge. Certain places became important enough to return to, again and again, not because of food, not because of shelter, not because of immediate survival, but because of memory. And at the center of that memory stood the dead. This may be one of the most important consequences of burial. The grave does not merely preserve a body. It creates a place with meaning, a place people remember, a place people revisit. And once multiple graves exist in the same location, something remarkable happens. The dead begin bringing the living together. Imagine a small group that has buried several members near a familiar cave. Years pass. The group travels across the landscape as usual. Yet eventually they return, not only because the cave provides shelter, because family members rest there, because stories are connected to the location, because memories are anchored to the earth itself. The burial site becomes more than geography. It becomes identity. This transformation may seem subtle, but its implications are enormous. For most of human history, communities existed through relationships. People knew one another personally. Trust depended upon familiarity. Social bonds held groups together. Burial added something new, a shared connection to the past. Now, the community included not only the living, it included the remembered dead, the ancestors, the people who came before. This expanded sense of belonging may have strengthened social cohesion in powerful ways. Because the dead do not argue, they do not compete, they do not leave. Yet their memory can inspire loyalty and unity. A burial ground reminds everyone that they share a common history, a common identity, a common lineage. Imagine children growing up hearing stories about individuals buried nearby. Perhaps an elder points toward a grave and says, "That was your grandmother. That was the hunter who discovered the valley. That was the woman who saved the group during a terrible winter." The child never met these people, yet they become important. Their stories become part of community memory. The burial site becomes a classroom, a place where identity is transmitted from one generation to the next. This process remains familiar even today. Modern societies preserve memory through monuments, cemeteries, memorials, and historical sites. People visit battlefields, honor ancestors, maintain family graves. These practices connect individuals to something larger than themselves. Ancient burial grounds may have served similar functions. Long before written history, graves help preserve collective memory. And collective memory is one of the foundations of culture. Without memory, every generation must start from the beginning. With memory, knowledge accumulates. Traditions endure. Communities maintain continuity across time. Burial helps make that continuity visible. The dead become permanent members of the social landscape. This permanence matters because human life is fragile. People die unexpectedly. Children may lose parents. Parents may lose children. Entire generations can disappear. Yet burial creates stability. The individuals are gone. The memory remains. The place remains. The community remains. In a constantly changing world, this continuity may have been deeply valuable. Archaeologists sometimes find evidence suggesting that certain burial locations were used repeatedly for long periods. Generation after generation returned to the same areas. This pattern suggests intentionality. People remembered where earlier burials existed. People cared enough to maintain those connections. The dead influenced decisions made by the living, even after death. This influence may represent the earliest stages of ancestor traditions, not necessarily ancestor worship, simply ancestor importance. The recognition that previous generations still matter, that their memory deserves preservation, that their lives continue shaping the community. Over time, such ideas can become extremely powerful. Many later societies developed complex relationships with ancestors. Ancestors provided legitimacy, authority, guidance, protection. Entire social systems sometimes revolved around maintaining connections with the dead. The roots of those systems may stretch back into prehistory, back to the first burial grounds, back to the first communities that chose remembrance over forgetting. Imagine a burial site containing several generations of the same family. Grandparents, parents, children, perhaps siblings buried side by side. Each grave tells an individual story. Together, they tell a collective story. A story of continuity. A story of belonging. A story of people connected through time. The burial ground becomes a map of relationships. A physical representation of social identity. This development may have changed how humans thought about land itself. Before burial, a location might matter because of resources, water, food, shelter. After burial, a location could matter because of memory, because family members rested there, because ancestors belonged there, because identity belonged there. The landscape became emotional as well as practical. This shift may have influenced human settlement patterns in profound ways. People become attached to places not only because they're useful, because they are meaningful, because they contain history. Burial helps create that history. Another fascinating consequence involves cooperation. Shared burial traditions can strengthen group identity. When everyone participates in remembering the dead, social bonds deepen. The community experiences grief together, performs rituals together, maintains memories together. These shared experiences encourage trust and solidarity. They remind individuals that they belong to something larger than themselves. This effect remains visible in modern funerals. People gather, support one another, share memories, strengthen relationships. Ancient burials may have served similar purposes. The dead help unite the living, not intentionally, socially, by creating opportunities for collective action and collective memory. Imagine a difficult year. Resources are scarce. Tensions increase. Disagreements emerge. The community faces uncertainty. In such moments, shared history can be stabilizing. People remember common ancestors, common struggles, common achievements. The burial ground becomes a symbol of continuity, a reminder that previous generations survived challenges too. The dead provide perspective, not through words, through memory, through presence within the cultural landscape. This may explain why burial became increasingly important over time. The practice offered benefits extending far beyond disposal of bodies. It strengthened identity, strengthened memory, strengthened community. The more societies developed, the more valuable these functions became. Yet another transformation was beginning as well. As burial sites accumulated and memory deepened, some graves started receiving special attention. Not all individuals were treated identically. Some graves contained unusual objects. Some burials involved greater effort. Some individuals appeared especially important. Why? The answer may reveal another major step in human social evolution. Because once certain graves become distinguished from others, burial begins reflecting differences in status, identity, and social roles. The dead are no longer simply remembered. They are remembered differently. And that distinction would eventually lead to kings' tombs, monuments, pyramids, royal burials, entire civilizations built around honoring particular individuals. But the origins of that process lie far earlier. In small prehistoric communities where memory, identity, and burial were becoming increasingly intertwined. Imagine standing beside an ancient burial ground thousands of years ago. The wind moves through the grass. The landscape appears quiet. Yet beneath the earth rest generations of stories. Parents who raised children, hunters who provided food, elders who shared knowledge, individuals whose lives shaped the community. Their bodies have vanished. Their influence remains. This is the true power of burial. Not preserving flesh, preserving meaning, preserving connection, preserving memory. The grave transforms mortality into continuity. A life ends. A story continues. And as stories accumulate, entire cultures emerge. Humanity becomes something more than a collection of individuals. It becomes a chain stretching across generations. Past connected to present. Present connected to future. The dead become links in that chain. And the grave becomes one of the first tools humans created to hold the chain together. Yet another mystery remains. When did burial stop being merely a response to death and begin becoming something sacred? When did graves start reflecting beliefs about invisible worlds, spirits, and life beyond death? When did memory become religion? In the next chapter, we will explore the moment when burial may have crossed an extraordinary threshold. The moment when humans began imagining that death was not necessarily the end, and how that idea would transform the course of human history forever. Chapter 14. The First Whispers of an Afterlife. Every human being who has ever lived has faced the same unavoidable question. What happens after death? Today, entire religions offer answers. Some speak of heaven, others speak of rebirth. Others describe spiritual worlds invisible to ordinary eyes. Across thousands of cultures and thousands of years, humanity has created countless explanations for what lies beyond the grave. Yet there was a time before any of those stories existed. A time before sacred texts, before temples, before priests, before formal religions of any kind. And somewhere within that distant world, the first whispers of an afterlife may have begun, not as organized doctrines, not as complete belief systems, but as simple questions, simple possibilities, simple imaginings born from grief and memory. The archaeological record cannot tell us exactly what ancient humans believed. No cave wall records their thoughts about the soul. No grave contains a written description of the afterlife. The evidence is frustratingly silent, yet the actions of the living sometimes provide clues. And some of those clues suggest that death was becoming more than a biological event. It was becoming a mystery. Imagine a burial taking place 40,000 years ago. The deceased is placed carefully into the ground. The body is arranged deliberately. Perhaps red ochre is scattered across the grave. Perhaps personal objects accompany the dead. A tool, a bead, an ornament, a treasured possession. At first glance, these items may seem insignificant, but they raise important questions. Why place useful objects in a grave? Why leave valuable possessions with someone who can no longer use them? The answer is not obvious. One possibility is purely emotional. The objects may symbolize memory. They may represent affection. They may express respect. A final gift from the living to the dead. Yet another possibility exists. Perhaps some people believe the dead might somehow need these items. Not physically, in another existence, in another world, in another state of being. This possibility is difficult to prove, but it appears repeatedly throughout human history. Many later societies buried people with objects intended for use after death. Food, weapons, jewelry, clothing, tools. Entire tombs were filled with possessions. The logic was clear. Death was not the end. The journey continued. Could the earliest grave goods represent the beginnings of this idea? Perhaps, or perhaps not. Archaeologists remain cautious. A grave containing objects does not automatically prove belief in an afterlife. Human behavior is rarely that straightforward. The objects may have held symbolic meanings unrelated to future existence. Yet the very ambiguity is revealing. Because ambiguity suggests imagination. Humans were beginning to think beyond immediate reality, beyond the visible world, beyond what could be directly observed. And that capacity for imagination lies at the heart of spiritual thought. Consider a simple observation available to every prehistoric human. PPD, yet memories remain vivid. A parent can still hear a child's voice in memory. A hunter can still remember a lost companion. A widow can still imagine conversations with a deceased partner. The dead seem absent, yet somehow still present. This experience is universal. Even today, grieving people often describe sensing the continued presence of loved ones. Not because they necessarily believe the person remains physically nearby, because memory is powerful, because relationships do not disappear instantly. Ancient humans experienced these same psychological realities, and without scientific explanations, those experiences may have encouraged new possibilities. Perhaps the dead continued existing in some form. Perhaps they remained nearby. Perhaps they traveled elsewhere. Perhaps death was a transition rather than an ending. Such ideas need not begin as formal religion. They can emerge naturally from ordinary human experiences, from dreams, from memories, from grief. Dreams in particular, may have played an important role. Imagine a prehistoric mother whose child has died. Weeks later, she dreams of the child. In the dream, the child appears alive, speaking, moving, smiling. The experience feels real, deeply real. She awakens confused and emotional. What exactly happened? Modern neuroscience offers explanations involving memory and brain activity. Ancient humans lacked such frameworks. For them, dreams may have seemed like encounters, experiences connecting different realities. If dreams repeatedly featured deceased individuals, it would be understandable for people to wonder whether the dead continued existing somewhere. Not necessarily in a fully developed afterlife, simply somewhere beyond ordinary perception. Such possibilities become increasingly plausible when combined with burial rituals. The grave creates a special space, a location associated with transition, a place where questions gather. The deceased disappears beneath the earth, yet remains important, remains remembered, remains socially present. The mind naturally searches for explanations. Where are they now? What became of them? Why do they still feel close? The first whispers of an afterlife may have emerged from exactly these questions. Not answers. Questions. The distinction matters. Human history often begins with curiosity long before certainty. Before people can explain a mystery, they must first recognize it as a mystery. Death became one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Burial reflects that realization. As burial practices grew more elaborate, the possibility of spiritual thinking becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Certain graves required significant effort. Some individuals were buried with remarkable care. Others received unusual objects or symbolic treatment. These actions suggest that the dead mattered in ways extending beyond practical concerns. Meaning was accumulating around death, and meaning often leads toward belief, not necessarily immediately, gradually, generation by generation. Imagine a child attending burials throughout life. The child hears stories, observes rituals, learns traditions. As an adult, the child repeats those traditions. The process continues. Ideas spread through culture, not because anyone writes them down, because people share them. Over thousands of years, simple intuitions can evolve into complex worldviews. The first burial may have required no explicit belief in an afterlife. Later burials may have encouraged such beliefs. The relationship works both ways. Beliefs shape rituals. Rituals reinforce beliefs. Together, they create cultural systems. Another fascinating clue comes from the treatment of bodies themselves. Some prehistoric burials display extraordinary care. The deceased is positioned carefully, protected, sometimes decorated. These actions suggest continued concern for the individual, not merely concern for the remains, concern for the person. The distinction is subtle but important. When people continue treating the dead as socially significant, they are already moving beyond purely biological thinking. The individual remains part of the community in some sense, even after death. That idea forms the foundation of many spiritual traditions. Not necessarily belief in heaven, not necessarily belief in souls, simply belief that death does not erase significance. The person continues maturing, and once that possibility exists, further possibilities naturally follow. The imagination begins exploring. What if they still exist? What if they can see us? What if they remain connected to us? What if death changes existence rather than ending it? These questions would eventually transform civilizations. But in prehistory, they may have existed only as possibilities. Whispers rather than doctrines. Intuitions rather than theology. Yet even whispers can change history, because ideas have consequences. If people believe the dead remain important, they may treat graves differently. They may return more often. They may preserve memories more carefully. They may develop rituals expressing those beliefs. The dead become active participants in cultural life, not physically, symbolically. and symbolic participation is enormously powerful. Human societies are built upon shared meanings, shared stories, shared understandings. The dead can occupy important roles within those systems. Ancestors become guardians, teachers, founders, sources of identity. All of these developments begin with a simple realization. Death raises questions, questions that cannot be answered through observation alone, questions requiring imagination, questions requiring belief. The earliest graves suggest humans have begun engaging with those questions, not because archaeologists can read ancient minds, because human actions reveal human concerns, and burial clearly demonstrates concern with mortality, concern with memory, concern with meaning. Imagine standing beside a grave 40,000 years ago. The earth has been disturbed. The burial is complete. The mourners remain nearby. No one knows exactly what they believe. No one can explain the contents of their thoughts. Yet one thing seems increasingly clear. The dead are not being forgotten. The relationship continues. In memory, in ritual, perhaps in imagination. And from that continuation, the first whispers of an afterlife may have emerged. Not suddenly, not dramatically, gradually, like a question carried on the wind. A question that humanity has never stopped asking. What happens after death? The answer remains elusive, but the search for an answer may have begun beside the earliest graves, beside people struggling to understand loss, beside communities refusing to let memory disappear, beside the first humans who looked at death and sensed that there might be more. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most extraordinary turning points in this story. The moment when burial ceased being rare and became widespread. The moment when humans across different regions began treating death in increasingly similar ways. And the moment when the first true cemeteries started appearing in the human story. Chapter 15, The First Cemeteries. For tens of thousands of years, burial appears only in scattered glimpses. A grave here, a grave there, an individual carefully placed within a cave, a child resting beneath red ochre, a Neanderthal laid to rest in a sheltered chamber. These discoveries are extraordinary, yet they remain isolated, rare sparks in a vast darkness. Then something changes, slowly at first, almost invisibly. The number of burials begins to grow. Graves appear more frequently. Communities return repeatedly to the same locations. The dead begin gathering together. And from this transformation emerges one of humanity's most important inventions, the cemetery. Today, cemeteries are familiar. Most towns have them. Most cities have them. They occupy a defined place within society, separate from everyday life, yet closely connected to it. We often take them for granted. But the very idea of a cemetery is astonishing. It represents a community making a collective decision. A decision that memory deserves space. A decision that the dead belong somewhere. A decision that remembrance should endure beyond individual lifetimes. Somewhere in prehistory, humans began making that decision. Imagine a world before cemeteries existed. Every burial is unique. Each death is handled individually. There is no designated place for the dead. No shared landscape of memory. Now imagine a different world. A person dies. The community brings them to a location already associated with earlier burials. Parents rest there. Grandparents rest there. Friends rest there. Generations rest there. The deceased joins a larger story, a larger community, a larger memory. The significance of this shift is difficult to overstate. Because once people begin burying their dead together, the relationship between the living and the dead changes fundamentally. Death becomes collective. Memory becomes collective. Identity becomes collective. The cemetery becomes a bridge connecting generations. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the earliest cemetery-like sites emerged long before cities or states existed, long before agriculture transformed human life. Groups of hunter-gatherers were already creating places where the dead accumulated over time. This is remarkable. It reveals that collective remembrance predates civilization itself. The desire to preserve memory appears deeply rooted within human nature. One of the fascinating aspects of early cemeteries is how much effort they required. Maintaining a burial location across generations demands organization. People must remember where graves are located. They must return repeatedly. They must protect the area from disturbance. They must teach younger generations about its significance. All of these activities require social coordination. In other words, cemeteries strengthen community, and communities strengthen cemeteries. The relationship reinforces itself. The more important the cemetery becomes, the more important collective memory becomes. The more important collective memory becomes, the more valuable the cemetery becomes. Imagine a child walking through one of these early burial grounds. The child sees no monuments, no carved names, no marble markers, yet the location is filled with meaning. Elders point towards certain places. Stories emerge. Lessons are shared. The dead become teachers, not because they speak, because memory speaks for them. This process may have played a crucial role in preserving cultural knowledge. Before writing, information survived through people, through stories, through repeated acts of remembrance. Burial grounds provided natural settings for these activities. The past became visible, not through documents, through place. Archaeologists sometimes refer to certain prehistoric cemeteries as memory landscapes. The phrase captures something important. The landscape itself becomes a repository of history, a map of relationships stretching across generations. Every grave adds another chapter. Every burial expands the story. Imagine standing on a hillside overlooking one of these ancient burial grounds. Beneath the earth rest dozens of individuals. Hunters, gatherers, children, elders, people who lived, loved, struggled, and died. Together, they form a community extending through time. The cemetery transforms individual mortality into collective continuity. A single life ends. The community continues. The story continues. This continuity may have become increasingly important as human populations grew. Larger groups require stronger forms of social cohesion. People need shared identities, shared histories, shared traditions. Cemeteries help provide all three. They remind individuals that they belong to something larger than themselves. A family, a lineage, a community, a people. The dead become symbols of that belonging. Another intriguing development appears alongside early cemeteries. Differences begin emerging between graves. Some individuals receive more elaborate treatment. Some graves contain unusual objects. Some burials occupy prominent positions. These differences suggest that social distinctions were becoming more visible. Not everyone was remembered in exactly the same way. Status, achievement, identity, all may have influenced burial practices. This trend would eventually grow into something much larger. The royal tombs of ancient civilizations, the pyramids of Egypt, the monumental burial mounds of Europe and Asia, the elaborate funerary complexes of kings and emperors. Yet the roots of those traditions lie here, in modest prehistoric cemeteries where communities first began distinguishing certain individuals from others. The process reveals something fascinating about human nature. Death does not erase social relationships. In many cases, it preserves them. The way a person is buried often reflects the way they were understood during life. The grave becomes a social statement, a reflection of identity, a reflection of value, a reflection of memory. As cemeteries expanded, another profound change occurred. The dead became increasingly tied to territory. Earlier hunter-gatherers often moved frequently. Burial grounds created reasons to return, reasons to remain connected to specific locations. The land itself acquired ancestral significance. This is where our people are buried. Such a statement carries enormous emotional weight. Even today, ancestral graves can create powerful attachments to place. The same may have been true thousands of years ago. The dead anchored communities to landscapes. The landscape became part of identity, and identity became part of the landscape. This development would later influence everything from tribal territories to national histories. The connection between land and ancestors runs deep within human experience. Yet another consequence followed. As burial grounds accumulated generations of dead, they became sacred, not necessarily in the formal religious sense we recognize today. Sacred in the sense that they demanded respect, special behavior, special treatment. People understood that certain places were different. Different because of memory. Different because of association with the dead. Different because of the stories they contained. This perception may represent an early form of sacred space. A location set apart from ordinary life. A location carrying emotional and symbolic significance. The cemetery becomes more than geography. It becomes meaning made visible. Archaeologists repeatedly encounter evidence of this transformation. Burial grounds carefully maintained. Burials organized in meaningful patterns. Communities investing effort across generations. These actions suggest long-term commitment, long-term memory, long-term identity. The dead help create stability in a changing world. Imagine living in a time before maps, governments, or written history. How do you know who you are? How do you know where you belong? One answer may lie beneath your feet, among the graves of those who came before. The cemetery tells you, your ancestors lived here. Your family belongs here. Your story began here. The dead become anchors of identity, and identity becomes one of humanity's most powerful social forces. By this stage in our story, burial has evolved far beyond its earliest origins. What may have begun as a simple response to death has become something much larger. A system for preserving memory, strengthening community, defining identity, creating sacred space, connecting generations. The transformation is extraordinary. Yet an even greater transformation still lies ahead. Because soon humanity will experience one of the most significant changes in its entire history. Agriculture, the rise of permanent settlements, the birth of villages, eventually the birth of cities. And with those changes, burial practices will evolve again. The graves of a few individuals will become the tombs of thousands. The memory of families will become the memory of civilizations. The dead will help shape kingdoms, religions, empires, and the course of history itself. In the next chapter, we will witness that transformation. We will explore how the agricultural revolution changed humanity's relationship with death forever, and how the first farmers turned burial into something the world had never seen before. Chapter 16, When Humans Stopped Wandering. For most of human history, people moved. They followed herds, followed rivers, followed the changing rhythms of the seasons. The world was a landscape of journeys, a place where survival depended upon mobility. If food disappeared, people moved. If weather changed, people moved. If resources became scarce, people moved again. Generation after generation lived this way. It was not primitive. It was successful. For tens of thousands of years, hunter-gatherers adapted to changing environments with remarkable skill. Yet around 12,000 years ago, a transformation began. Slowly, unevenly, in different regions at different times. But once it started, the world would never be the same. Humans began staying put. They planted crops, domesticated animals, built permanent homes, created villages, and eventually created cities. This change, often called the agricultural revolution, altered nearly every aspect of human life, including death, perhaps especially death, because when people stop wandering, the dead stop wandering too. Imagine a small farming settlement in the ancient world. Unlike earlier hunter-gatherer camps, this place remains occupied year after year. Children are born here. Adults work here. Families grow here. The same houses stand season after season. The same fields are cultivated repeatedly. Life acquires a new kind of permanence. And with permanence comes a new relationship with memory. For mobile hunter-gatherers, burial sites often existed apart from daily life. People might revisit them periodically, but settlements themselves shifted. Farmers lived differently. The dead could remain close. Very close. Some of the earliest agricultural communities buried family members beneath their homes. Imagine that for a moment. Gran Mufadillas. She is buried beneath the floor of the house. Years later, grandchildren play above that very spot. The dead remain physically integrated into everyday life. Not distant, not forgotten, present. This practice may seem unusual to modern readers, yet reveals something profound. The connection between ancestors and place had become stronger than ever before. The home was no longer just a shelter. It was a repository of family history. The living and the dead occupied the same landscape, sometimes even the same structure. This development transformed burial. Graves became part of community architecture, part of social identity, part of daily experience. Archaeologists have uncovered remarkable examples of such practices in early farming settlements. Again and again, evidence suggests that ancestors remained deeply woven into community life. The dead were not removed from society. They remained participants in it, symbolically, emotionally, culturally. The implications are enormous, because agriculture created something humanity had never truly experienced before. Long-term continuity in a single location. A family might remain connected to the same house for generations. The same fields, the same village, the same burial places. Memory accumulated, not only through stories, through physical presence. The landscape itself became saturated with history. Imagine walking through one of these early villages. Every path carries memories. Every building contains stories. Every burial connects the present generation to previous ones. The dead become increasingly important because they help explain ownership, belonging, and identity. Whose land is this? Our ancestors worked it. Why do we live here? Our ancestors lived here. Why do we belong together? Our ancestors are buried here. The connection between burial and social identity grows stronger. As villages expanded, another change occurred. Population increased. More people meant more deaths. More deaths meant more graves. Burial became a larger social concern. Communities needed organized approaches, shared traditions, established customs. The treatment of the dead became increasingly formalized. This formalization marks an important stage in cultural development. Practices once shaped primarily by family relationships begin serving larger communities. Burial becomes institutional, not in the modern bureaucratic sense, in the social sense. The community develops expectations, rules, traditions. People know what should happen when someone dies. The process becomes predictable, and predictability creates stability, especially during moments of grief. At the same time, agriculture created entirely new forms of inequality. Some families accumulated more resources than others. Some individuals gained greater influence. Some households became more powerful. These differences often appeared in burial practices. Certain graves contain richer collections of objects. Certain individuals receive special treatment. Status survives death. The grave becomes a reflection of social position. This trend will become increasingly important as societies continue growing. Eventually, it will produce kings' tombs, royal mausoleums, and monumental burial complexes. But the process begins here. In farming villages where social distinctions become visible beneath the earth. One of the most fascinating aspects of agricultural societies is their relationship with time. Hunter-gatherers often focus on seasonal cycles. Farmers must think years ahead. Planting today affects harvest months later. Trees planted now may not mature for decades. The future becomes increasingly important. And when people think more about the future, they often think more about the past as well. The two become connected. Ancestors become examples, sources of continuity. links in a chain stretching across generations. Burial helps reinforce this perspective. The dead remind communities that they are part of something larger than a single lifetime. The individual life becomes one chapter in a much longer story. Agriculture encourages exactly this kind of thinking, because farms, houses, and villages often outlast individual people. The community endures. The land endures. The memory endures. The dead become symbols of permanence, symbols of continuity, symbols of belonging. Imagine a farmer standing beside the grave of a grandparent. The fields surrounding them were once cultivated by that grandparent. The house nearby may have been built by that grandparent. The knowledge sustaining the community may have been passed down by that grandparent. The grave represents more than death. It represents inheritance, not merely material inheritance, cultural inheritance, identity, memory, tradition. This growing emphasis on ancestry may explain why burial becomes increasingly elaborate in many agricultural societies. The dead are no longer only loved ones. They are founders, predecessors, the people who made the present possible. Honoring them becomes socially important. Another major development emerges as well: the appearance of communal rituals surrounding death. Larger populations create larger ceremonies. More participants, more shared experiences. Funerals become opportunities for reinforcing social bonds. The entire community gathers. Stories are shared. Relationships are reaffirmed. The dead continue serving the living by strengthening collective identity. This role will remain central throughout human history. Even today, funerals often function as gatherings for the living as much as commemorations of the dead. The roots of that pattern may extend deep into prehistory. As agricultural communities grow larger, they become increasingly complex. New occupations appear. New social roles emerge. New belief systems develop. Religious specialists eventually arise. Ceremonies become more structured. Ideas about the afterlife become more detailed. The dead occupy increasingly significant positions within spiritual life. What began as simple graves evolves into something far more elaborate, a relationship between humans and mortality that touches every aspect of society. And yet, despite all these changes, something remains constant: the emotional core of burial. A parent mourning a child, a spouse mourning a partner, friends mourning companions. These experiences remain recognizable across thousands of years. The technologies change. The rituals change. The beliefs change. The grief remains. This continuity may be the most remarkable aspect of burial history. The first grave and the modern funeral are separated by tens of thousands of years. Yet both arise from the same fundamental reality. People matter to one another. When those people die, the living respond. With memory, with ritual, with care. Agriculture changed many things, but did not change that. Instead, it gave humanity new ways to express it, new ways to preserve it, new ways to build entire societies around it. And as villages transformed into towns and towns transformed into cities, burial would evolve once again. The dead would no longer belong only to families. They would belong to civilizations. Their tombs would become monuments. Their memory would become politics. Their graves would reshape landscapes. The age of ancestors was giving way to the age of kingdoms. And with it would come some of the most extraordinary burial structures ever created. In the next chapter, we will witness the rise of monumental burial, the moment when humanity began building for the dead on a scale never seen before, and how the humble grave of prehistory eventually led to pyramids, tombs, and eternal cities of the dead. Chapter 17: The Age of Tombs and Monuments. The first grave was small, a shallow pit in the earth, a body carefully placed beneath soil and stone. No towering architecture, no carved inscriptions, no elaborate ceremony preserved in history, just a simple act of remembrance. Yet from that humble beginning would emerge some of the most astonishing structures humanity has ever created. The path from the first burial to the great monuments of the ancient world is one of the most remarkable journeys in human history. Because once humans began honoring the dead, they never truly stopped. Instead, the practice grew, expanded, transformed, until entire civilizations devoted immense resources to remembering those who had passed away. Imagine standing in a farming village thousands of years after the first intentional burials. The community is larger now, more organized. Generations have lived and died in the same place. Ancestors occupy an increasingly important role in social life. People remember not only parents and grandparents, but founders, leaders, important figures whose influence continues long after death. As these communities become more complex, so do their burial practices. A simple grave is no longer always enough. Some individuals are considered especially significant. Their memory deserves greater visibility, greater permanence, greater recognition. And so humanity begins building. At first, the structures are modest. Earthen mounds, stone markers, small chambers. Yet even these early monuments reveal a profound change. The grave is no longer hidden. It is displayed, made visible, integrated into the landscape. The dead are becoming public figures. Their memory becomes part of community identity. This transformation reflects a broader social shift. As societies grow larger, personal memory becomes insufficient. A village may remember its elders directly. A kingdom cannot. The solution is monumentality. Physical structures capable of preserving memory across generations. A monument says, "This person mattered. This event mattered. This story should not be forgotten." Burial architecture becomes a tool against oblivion, and humanity embraces it with extraordinary enthusiasm. Across different regions of the world, communities begin developing their own approaches to monumental burial. Some construct burial mounds. Others create stone chambers. Others carve tombs into hillsides or cliffs. The details vary. The underlying impulse remains familiar. People want memory to endure. They want the dead to remain visible within the world of the living. One of the fascinating aspects of these early monuments is their labor cost. Building even a modest tomb requires effort. People must gather materials, organize workers, invest time that could otherwise be spent on immediate survival. This willingness to devote resources to the dead reveals something important. The dead have become socially valuable, not economically valuable, symbolically valuable. The memory of important individuals strengthens communities, legitimizes leadership, preserves identity. Monuments help achieve these goals. Imagine a young child standing before one of these early tombs. The structure existed before the child was born. It may remain long after the child dies. The monument creates continuity across time. It connects generations that never meet. This ability to transcend individual lifetimes becomes increasingly important as societies expand. Eventually, monuments begin serving political purposes as well. Leaders recognize the power of memory. A remembered ruler retains influence. A forgotten ruler disappears. The tomb becomes a statement about authority, about legitimacy, about permanence. The dead continue shaping the living world. And nowhere is this phenomenon more dramatic than in ancient Egypt. For many people, the pyramids represent the ultimate burial monuments. Immense structures rising above the desert, visible from great distances, designed to endure for thousands of years. And endure they have. Long after the civilization that built them transformed beyond recognition, the pyramids remain. Silent, massive, defiant. A declaration that memory can challenge time itself. Imagine the intellectual journey required to create such structures. The first grave required only a pit. The pyramid required mathematics, engineering, administration, labor organization, religious ideology. An entire civilization cooperating toward a common goal. Yet despite the enormous differences in scale, the emotional core remains surprisingly familiar. the desire to preserve significance, the desire to honor the dead, the desire to resist forgetting. The pyramid is, in one sense, simply a grave made larger. Much larger. The same pattern appears elsewhere. Across the ancient world, monumental tombs emerge repeatedly. Burial mounds in Europe, royal tombs in Asia, funerary complexes in the Americas. Different cultures develop different solutions to the same problem. How do we remember those who matter? How do we preserve identity across generations? How do we confront mortality? The answers vary. The questions remain constant. As monuments grow more elaborate, beliefs about death often become more elaborate as well. Religious systems develop detailed descriptions of afterlives. Funerary rituals become increasingly sophisticated. Specialists emerge whose responsibilities include guiding the dead or managing burial ceremonies. Death becomes a central concern of organized religion. This development should not surprise us. Death raises profound questions. Questions about meaning. Questions about justice. Questions about existence itself. Religions provide frameworks for addressing those questions. Burial becomes one expression of those frameworks. The grave is no longer merely a resting place. It becomes part of a larger spiritual journey. Yet, even amid these complex developments, traces of humanity's earliest impulses remain visible. Compassion, memory, connection. The same forces that may have inspired the first grave continue influencing the largest tomb. A king's pyramid and a prehistoric child's burial differ dramatically in appearance. But both reflect a refusal to treat death as meaningless. Both reflect a desire to preserve significance. Both reflect the human need to remember. Archaeologists often emphasize that monuments tell us as much about the living as they do about the dead. This observation is important. A tomb reveals what a society values, who it honors, what it fears, what it hopes, what it believes. In this sense, burial monuments are cultural mirrors. They reflect the priorities of the people who built them. A society investing enormous resources in tombs is telling us something about itself. Something about memory. Something about identity. Something about mortality. The same principle applies at every scale. From a simple prehistoric grave to a vast royal mausoleum. Burial reveals human concerns. And one concern appears universal: the desire for continuity. Humans know they are mortal, yet they consistently seek ways to extend influence beyond death. Children, stories, monuments, legacies. Burial often becomes part of that effort. The grave preserves a name, a memory, a connection. Even when the individual is forgotten, the structure may remain. Archaeologists encounter this reality constantly. Countless ancient tombs survive. The names of those buried within have vanished. Yet the desire that created the tomb remains visible. A human being once stood here and said, "Remember." Thousands of years later, we are still listening. The rise of monumental burial marks one of the most visible chapters in humanity's relationship with death. But is not the end of the story, because even the grandest monuments eventually face the same challenge. Time. Stone erodes. Kingdoms collapse. Religions change. Empires disappear. Nothing lasts forever, not even pyramids. And this reality brings us back to a question that has haunted humanity from the beginning. What survives? Is it the body? The monument? The memory? The story? The answer may be more complex than any civilization imagined, because the true legacy of the first grave may not be any specific tomb. It may be something far more enduring, a way of thinking, a way of feeling, a way of relating to one another, a tradition that continues across tens of thousands of years. In the next chapter, we will leave behind the kings and monuments and return to the deeper question at the heart of this story. Why did burial survive when so many other ancient traditions disappeared? And what does that reveal about the human condition itself? Chapter 18. Why burial never disappeared. Across the long story of humanity, countless practices have come and gone. Languages have been born and vanished. Entire belief systems have risen, spread, and disappeared. Cities have been built and abandoned. Empires have collapsed into dust. Even ways of living that lasted for tens of thousands of years were eventually replaced by something new. Yet through all of this change, one practice has remained remarkably persistent. Burial, not identical in every place, not unchanged through time, but present in almost every known human culture. The question is unavoidable. Why? Why did burial survive when so many other ancient behaviors faded away? The answer is not simple. It never is with human behavior, but it may lie in something fundamental about what it means to be human. Burial persists because it sits at the intersection of several deep human needs. Not just one, many. It is not only a ritual, not only a disposal method, not only a religious act. It is all of these things at once, and more. At its most basic level, burial solves a physical problem. Dead bodies must be dealt with. They cannot remain indefinitely within living spaces. They change. They decay. They attract danger. From a purely practical standpoint, humans needed ways to manage death safely. But practicality alone does not explain burial's persistence. Many practical solutions disappear once better alternatives emerge. Burial did not disappear. It evolved, which means it must have offered more than utility. It offered meaning, and meaning is far harder to replace. Because burial also solves an emotional problem. Humans form deep attachments. We bond. We love. We depend on one another. When those bonds are broken by death, something remains unresolved. The body is gone, but the relationship does not feel finished. Burial creates a moment where that relationship can be acknowledged, expressed, and gently transformed. It gives grief a shape, a place, a time. Without such structure, loss would remain uncontained. Burial contains it, not by removing pain, but by organizing it. And humans, across all cultures, have always needed ways to organize pain. But burial does something even deeper than emotional regulation. It creates memory that lasts beyond individual lives. A grave is a physical anchor for remembrance, a point in space where stories gather, where names are spoken, where absence becomes visible. Without burial, memory would still exist, but it would drift. With burial, memory becomes grounded. And once memory is grounded, it can be passed on more easily. From generation to generation, from parent to child, from past to future. This is where burial becomes more than personal practice. It becomes cultural infrastructure. It helps societies remember themselves. And societies that remember themselves can endure. But there is still more. Burial also answers a question humans cannot avoid asking. What does death mean? Even in the absence of formal religion, humans struggle with the idea that a person can exist and then suddenly not exist. The body remains. The mind does not. The presence becomes absence. This contradiction demands interpretation. Burial provides a space where that interpretation can happen. It does not force a single answer. It allows many. The dead are gone. The dead are resting. The dead are continuing in another form. The dead are remembered. The dead are still part of us. Different cultures chose different explanations, but burial itself created the conditions for those explanations to emerge. It opened a conceptual space around death, a space filled by imagination, belief, and meaning. And perhaps most importantly, burial persists because it is not just about the dead. It is about the living. Every burial is performed by those who remain. It reflects how they understand themselves, their relationships, their values, their fears, their hopes. A society that buries its dead is also a society defining what it means to be human. In that sense, burial is not a practice we inherited from the past. It is a mirror we continue to look into. Even today, even now, modern cemeteries, ancient graves, prehistoric burials, they all point back to the same truth. Humans do not simply dispose of the dead. We respond to them. We interpret them. We remember them. We struggle with what they mean. And that struggle has never ended. It has only changed form. Technology has advanced. Cities have grown. Knowledge has expanded beyond anything early humans could imagine. But the moment remains the same. A life ends, and the living must decide what to do with that ending. That decision is where burial begins. And that decision is why burial continues. Because as long as humans exist, we will face loss. We will face memory. We will face the tension between presence and absence. And we will need ways to carry that tension forward. Burial is one of the oldest ways we have found to do that. Not perfect, not universal in its details, but profoundly human. So when we look back at the first graves, those quiet, simple places where early humans placed their dead, we are not just looking at an ancient custom. We are looking at the beginning of something ongoing, a relationship between the living and the dead, a relationship that has never truly ended. It has only evolved, from shallow pits in the earth, to cemeteries filled with generations, to monuments carved into stone, to memories carried in language and story. The forms change. The need does not. And that may be the final reason burial never disappeared. Because it is not only about death. It is about what survives death in the minds of the living. Memory, meaning, connection, and the quiet human refusal to let those things vanish without trace. In the end, the first burial was not just an act of disposal. It was an act of understanding, an attempt, perhaps the first of its kind, to answer a question every human life eventually asks. What do we do with love when it no longer has a place to go? And from that question, burial was born. And from burial, so much of human culture followed.